Welcome to Haunted Bedtime, where nightmares come alive. Tonight's story will blur the line between fear and reality. Once it begins, there's no turning back. Enjoy the chills and subscribe to Haunted Bedtime. Your support keeps the darkness alive. Where and what time are you watching this from? Drop it in the comments and join the terror tonight. I takened this route countless times, but tonight, something fell off. An eerie sense of unease settled in the pit of my stomach, making my skin prickle. With discomfort, I glanced in the rearview mirror, and that's when I saw a pair of headlights appear in the distance, steadily gaining on me. At first, I thought it was just another driver heading home late like me, but as the vehicle drew closer, I noticed it was tailgating me aggressively. Its high beams blinded me in the mirror. I grit my teeth and slowed down, hoping the driver would pass me by. Instead, the car stayed right on my bumper, its driver seemingly oblivious my attempts to encourage him to pass. Anxiety gnawed at me as I kept my eyes on the road, constantly checking the rearview mirror to see if the car was still there. Minutes turned into an eternity as the unnerving pursuit continued. I couldn't make out any details about the driver or the vehicle. It was just an ominous silhouette in the darkness, panic said. And as I realized this was no ordinary road rage incident, it was something far more sinister, I decided to take the next exit, hoping to lose the relentless pursuer on the unfamiliar back roads. The exit led to a desolate, winding path through a dense forest. My heart raced as I navigated the treacherous turns, but the car behind me stayed on my tail. Fear began to consume me. I couldn't understand why this person was fixated on me. I'd done nothing to provoke them, and there was no logical reason for their aggressive pursuit. Desperation set, and as I approached a deserted gas station, I swerved into the locked tires, screeching, and parked by the darkened pumps. My trembling hands fumbled for my phone, and I dialed 911, praying for a lifeline. The dispatcher assured me that help was on the way, but the minutes ticked by agonizingly slowly as I watched the menacing car pull into the gas station. The driver's side door opened, and the tall figure emerged, shrouded in darkness. I held my breath, fearing what would happen next. The figure approached my car, and for the first time I could make out some details: wild, disheveled hair and an unsettling grin that sent shivers down my spine. This person was clearly unhinged. I locked my car doors and continued to speak to the dispatcher. My voice quivering. The man outside began to pound on my windows, shouting incoherently. He seemed arranged, hued by an unpredictable mix of anger and madness. Suddenly, the flashing lights of a police car cut through the darkness, and two officers approached, guns. They ordered the man to step away from my car, and after a tense standoff, they managed to detain him. Relief washed over me as I watched the officers apprehend my tormentor. I would later learn that he had a history of mental illness and had become fixated on me for reasons known only to him. As I drove away from the gas station, the ordeal behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability and terror that had correct me. It was a crisp autumn evening, and I was driving home from a beautiful wedding with my teenage son. The reception had been joyous, and we were content, basking in the warm afterglow of the celebration. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a gentle silvery glow over the winding, deserted road ahead. As we continued our journey through the rural countryside, the atmosphere inside the car was serene, but outside the night felt eerily quiet. Miles stretched between us and the nearest town, and we hadn't seen another soul for some time. That's when we spotted him, a lone hitchhiker, standing on the side of the road, his thumb outstretched in a gesture of desperate hope. I exchanged a glance with my son, and our paternal instincts kicked in. It was the kind of night when you feel an obligation to help a fellow traveler in need. I pulled over, and the hitchhiker approached the car. He looked to be in his late 30s with scruffy facial hair and a worn backpack slung over one shoulder. We greeted him with warm smiles, asking him where he was headed. He replied with a nod of gratitude and said he was headed to a town a few hours away. As he settled into the back seat, our conversation flowed easily. He introduced himself as Mark and shared stories of his travels and adventures. Seemed friendly and affable, and my initial unease about picking up a stranger began to dissipate. However, as the miles passed, a subtle shift occurred. Mark's stories became increasingly bizarre and disjointed. He spoke of distant places and strange encounters, weaving tales that grew more unsettling with each passing minute. My son shot me a concerned look, and I realized that we might have made a mistake. I decided to gently steer the conversation in a different direction, but Mark's response is crew fake, and he started muttering under his breath. He seemed agitated, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. As we approached the next intersection, I slowed down and let Mark know we'd be turning left. That's when he suddenly lunged forward, grabbing the steering wheel, and attempted to jerk to the right. Panic coursed through me as I fought to regain control of the car, my heart pounding in my Chess, my son, screamed in terror as I struggled with Mark, trying to push him away from the wheel. It was a terrifying struggle, and for a moment I feared that we would green off the road and into the darkness. But with a surge of adrenaline, I managed to push Mark back into his seat and regain control of the car, and heavily I yelled at Mark to get out of the car, my voice laced with anger and fear. He complied. Stumbling out onto the roadside, I sped away from him as fast as I could, my hands still trembling on the wheel as we drove on. My son and I were shaking to our course. We couldn't comprehend what had just happened, why Mark had turned from a seemingly harmless hitchhiker into a violent, unhinged stranger. We contemplated reporting the incident to the authorities, but we couldn't find a logical explanation for his behavior. The encounter haunted us for the rest of our journey home. We couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly escaped a terrible fate. I had been at a friend's house, and now I was heading back home, my eye on the steering wheel tightening. As I navigated the lonely road, as I continued down the isolated highway, I felt a sudden shudder ripple through my car. The engine spluttered and died, leaving the coasting to a stop on the side of the road. Panic began to creep in as I tried to restart the engine, but refused to respond. My heart raced as I realized I was stranded in the middle of nowhere just when despair was threatening to consume me. I saw the dim glow of headlights approaching from behind. Relief washed over me as a beat-up old fan pulled over and a man, hair and disheveled clothing, stepped out. He approached my car and introduced himself as Mike, offering to take a look at the engine. I hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to trust a stranger who had come to my rescue. But the alternative was spending the night alone on this deserted road, and fear pushed me to accept his help. Mike opened the hood and began tinkering with the engine, is just playing in the eerie side silence as I watched him work. A sense of unease washed over me. Mike's movements were deliberate but oddly furtive, like he was hiding something. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mike straightened up and turned to face me. A sinister smile played on his lips, and he said, "I fixed your car, but I think I deserve something in return." My heart plummeted and my stomach churned with dread. I asked him what he meant. My voice trembling, Mike's eyes poured into mine, his case called and calculating, as he made it clear that he expected a certain kind of payment for his assistance. I was trapped alone with this strange and menacing man on a desolate highway. Fear surged through me, but I had to think fast. Desperation took hold, and I reached for my phone, pretended to call for help, while keeping my eye on Mike. His demeanor grew increasingly agitated, and he demanded that I end the call. I think compliance, but I knew I needed a plan, and fast. With trembling hands, I unbuckled my seat belt and made a run for it, sprinting away from the car, leaving everything behind. I could hear Mike cursing behind me as he gave chase. I pushed through the darkness, my breath coming in like a gasp. The woods loomed ahead, and I clung into them, hoping to lose him in the dense underbrush. Hours passed as I stumbled through the woods, terrified and disoriented. I finally emerged onto another road, or a passing car stopped to help, I explained my harrowing encounter with Mike, and the driver called the police. They found my car abandoned by the side of the road, but Mike was nowhere to be seen. The police assured me they would search for him, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if Mike was still out there lurking in the shadows. In the aftermath of that night, I felt a profound sense of vulnerability. I had narrowly escaped a perilous situation, and the memory of that sinister stranger haunted Lou every thought I was left with, a chilling reminder that danger could strike when you least expect it, even on loneliest of roads. It was a chilly autumn evening, and I was making my way home from a friend's house. The sun had long dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty road. My gas gauge was flirting with the Trinity, so I pulled into a dimly lit gas station on the outskirts of town. As I parked at the pump and climbed out of my car, I couldn't help but notice the eerie silence that enveloped the area. The only sound was the faint hum of the gas station's fluorescent lights overhead. I shook off Beyond and began filling up my tank. Just as I was lost and thought the ominous crawl of an engine pierced the quiet night, I turned to see a sleek black sedan with tinted windows pulling into the station. It rolled to a stop at the pump opposite mine, and the engine died, plunging us back into an unsettling silence. 3 men emerged from the car, all wearing dark clothing and baseball caps pulled low over their faces. Alarm bells started ringing in my head as they approached, their steps deliberate and synchronized. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I tried to focus on my task, avoiding eye contact as I continued pumping gas, hoping they would mind their own business. But my heart was pounding in my chest, and indeed a sweat trickled down my temple despite the cool night air. As they drew closer, I could make out their faces in the harsh glow of the gas had on lights there. Expressions were hard, their eyes devoid of any warmth or humanity. He quelled up inside me, and I fumbled to finish refueling my car. One of the men, the tallest of the trio, stepped forward and asked me for a lighter. I stammered that I didn't want my voice. Trembling, the men exchanged a quick glance, and the sinister smile played on their lips. Then, as if out of nowhere, another car pulled into the gas station, headlights sweeping across seeing the sudden arrival of this unexpected savior startled the menacing trial, and they retreated to their cars, slipping into the shadows. A new arrival, a middle-aged woman, sensed my distress and asked if I was okay. I explained what just transpired, and she reassured me that I was safe now. She offered to wait until I had finished refueling, and even walked me back to my car, while watching as I locked the doors. As I continued my journey on my hands, still trembling, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped a terrible fate. Foreign pizza delivery driver navigating the labyrinth and streets of our small town, delivering cheesy pies and needy delights to hungry customers. Most nights were uneventful, just a routine of orders, deliveries, and tips. But there was one night, one terrifying night, that still haunts my dream. I had received an order for a delivery to our remote location on the outskirts of town. It was an odd request, but the promise of a generous tip lured me. Into my car, pizza, securely placed in the passenger seat. The address led me deeper into the darkness of the rural outskirts, the road narrowing and winding as I venture farther away from the comforting glow of street lights. My headlights sliced through the inky blackness. As I followed the directions, relying heavily on my GPS, the anticipation of the tip made the eerie journey feel worth it, at least until I rounded a bend and saw a makeshift roadblock illuminated by my headlights. My heart sank as I pulled my car to a stop. Deformities to the king of menacing men bathed in the stark glow of my headlights. They were dressed in like it, clothes, their faces obscured by shadowy hoodies and baseball caps. The atmosphere was thick with tension. As I rolled down my window, dread coiling in my stomach, one of the men, the apparent leader, approached my car, his face partially revealed by the dim light. He was scruffy, with an unkempt beard and a cold, calculating gaze that sent shivers down my spine. He asked for my wallet and phone, his voice low and menacing. I tried to stammer out a protest, but he leaned closer, revealing that lint of something metallic tucked into his belt. It didn't take much for me to realize that cooperating was my only option. I handed over my wallet, and a sense of vulnerability engulfing. As I did, the leader took my belongings without a word, then signaled for the others to move aside. They cleared the roadblock, allowing me to pass. Tension in the air was palpable as I slowly drove past them, their eyes never leaving my car. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel as I continued down the dark road, my heart pounding in my chest. I was left shaken, robbed of my belongings, but more importantly, robbed of my sense of safety. I finally reached a remote location to deliver the pizzas and recounted the harrowing encounter to my manager. We called the police. If I knew the chances of catching those men were slim, it was a night-nourished experience that changed me forever from that night on. I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability, the haunting memory of those hooded figures lurking in the darkness. I've done a trucker for years, driving long hauls across the country, and I've seen my fair share of strange things on the road, but nothing could prepare me for that one night, that chilling encounter that still makes my skin crawl. It was a moonless night, the kind that swallows the world in darkness, and I was navigating the empty highways. The hum of the engine was my only companion, and the only other signs of life were the occasional pairs of headlights approaching from the opposite direction. As I continued down the desolate stretch of road, a pair of headlights appeared in my rear-view mirror, gaining on me fast. I didn't think much of it. At first, it's common for trucks to pass each other on the highway, but as the headlights drew closer, I noticed something was off. The truck tailing me was an old beat-up rake, its once bright paint now faded to a dull gray. It was a stark contrast to the polished modern trucks that typically shared the road with me. The driver seemed determined to get closer, tailgating me relentlessly. Miami's crew, with each passing mile, I signaled to change lanes, hoping to let the aggressive driver pass. But he matched my movements, staying dangerously close. My heart started to race as I realized this wasn't just an impatient trucker trying to overtake me. There was something sinister about the way he clung to my tail. I decided to take the next exit, hoping to put some distance between us, but the truck followed suit. Panic knotted my insides as I contemplated my options. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pursued by someone with malicious intent. I reached for my CB radio, my voice trembling. As I broadcast a call for help, the response was immediate. A fellow trucker offering to guide me to the nearest rest stop where we could contact the authorities. As we approached the rest stop, the menacing trucker finally backed off, disappearing into The darkness I pulled into the rest stopped my arts. Still pounding, and met my fellow trucker who had come to my rescue. He was a crystal veteran weathered by years on the road, and he shared my unease. We recorded the incident to the police, who promised to keep an eye out for the road truck. But as I lay in my sleeper cap at night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter was far from over. The following days were a blur of anxiety and paranoia. I constantly scanned the road behind me, my nurse. On edge, it was as if the sinister trucker was still out there lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I became obsessed with finding answers, poring over news articles and message boards in search of any information about the mysterious trucker. But there was nothing, no reports of similar ENC encounters, no sightings of the old gray rig. Weeks turned into months, and eventually the fear began to recede. Life on the road went back to its usual routine, and I slowly regained my sense of security. But the memory of that chilling encounter still haunts me, a constant reminder that the open road can be a treacherous place where darkness and danger lurk just beyond the headlights. I've been a tow truck driver for years, and I've seen my fair share of breakdowns in all kinds of places, but nothing could prepare me for that night, the chilling encounter that still haunts my nightmares. It was a frigid winter evening, and I just finished up a long shift. I was ready to head home, curl up with a hot meal, and forget about work for a while. But then the call came, and I'll break down on an isolated road miles away from the city. Reluctantly, I fired up the old tow truck and headed out into the dark. The road I was sent toward the desolate stretched through a dense forest with towering trees casting eerie shadows. In the dim moonlight, the silence was deafening, broken only by the crunch of my tires on the icy pavement. As I knew the location, I could see a vehicle pulled over to the side of the road, its hazard lights flashing. Weakly in the darkness, I parked my truck behind it and climbed out, my prep forming frosty clouds and the freezing air approaching the stranded car. I saw it was an old sedan, its windows frosted over from the cold. I knocked on the driver's side window, but there was no response. My flashlight revealed the car's interior to be empty, the engine still running. I called out, but my voice seemed to disappear into the abyss of the forest, and he settled in. As I considered the possibility that the dagger might have wandered off into the woods in search of help, I decided to investigate further. I left my truck's headlights on, casting an eerie glow on the deserted road with my flashlight in hand. I ventured into the forest, my boots crunching through the snow. The trees seemed to close, and around me, as I ventured deeper into the darkness, my imagination played tricks on me, conjuring up all sorts of terrifying scenarios. I couldn't shape the feeling that I was being watched, that someone or something was lurking in the shadows. After what felt like an eternal, I came across a small clearing, and there I saw something that made my blood run cold. The driver of the stranded car was standing in the center of the clearing. His back to me, he was dressed in tattered clothes, his shoulders hunched as if he were in pain. "Hey, are you okay?" I called out, my voice quivering with fear. There was no response, just an ear silence that seemed to stretch on forever. I cautiously approached him, my heart pounding in my chest. As I got closer, I could see that his skin was unnaturally pale, almost translucent. His hair was long, matted, obscuring his face. "Sir, I'm here to help," I said, reaching out to touch his shoulder. But as my hand lead contact, he turned around, and that's when I saw his face. His eyes were empty voids, devoid of any life or emotion. His mouth was stretched into a grotesque smile, revealing rows of sharp yellow teeth. His skin was a sickly shade of gray, and his clothes were taped with dirt and dry blood. I stumbled back in horror, my flashlight falling from my hand. The creature before me let out a gut-ural and human sound, and then it lunged. I barely had time to react, scrambling backward. As it reached for meat with its bony fingers, I bolted to the trees, my heart pounding in my chest, and didn't stop until I reached my tow track. I slammed the door shut and peeled out of there, leaving the creature and the stranded car behind. I never reported what I saw to the police, who would believe me anyway. I still have nightmares about that night, the face of that creature haunting my every moment. I'd stopped taking calls in the dead of night on isolated roads, and I avoid the forest at all costs. But sometimes, as I'm driving down a dark, deserted road, I can't help but wonder if that creature is still out there lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. And that thought terrifies me more than anything else. It was supposed to be a memorable family road trip, a chance to bond, create lasting memories, and see the beauty of our country. We packed up our old SUV, my wife, our 2 kids, and I, and hit the open road. The first few days were idyllic, picturesque landscapes rolling past us, laughter filling the air, and the promise of adventure around every bend. But then on the outskirts of a small town, our Jez informed us that the road ahead was closed due to construction, with no alternative routes in sight, and the sun setting. We had no choice but to follow a detour sign down and narrow. Winding lean colon seemed to grow narrower with every mile, the trees on either side crowding in like silent sentinels as we ventured deeper into the Ciel astrophobia. Overhead blocked off the dying light, casting an eerie darkness. Over the road, my wife tried to reassure the kids, keeping their spirits up with tales of adventure and the promise of a new exciting route ahead, but her optimism couldn't dispel the unease that had settled in my cut, and then we saw the car, or what was left of it, blocking the narrow road ahead, its mangled frame and shattered. Windshield hinted at a horrific accident. My heart sank, fearing the worst. I brought the SUV to a STO, the engine idling nervously. The kids began to ask questions, their faces etched with concern, and my wife shot me a worried look. I told them to stay in the car while I investigated. As I approached the wreckage, a sense of foreboding washed over me. The car had clearly been in a terrible collision, but it was a complete absence of any emergency vehicles or first responders that send shivers down my spine. Cautiously, I peeked inside the ruined vehicle, and my blood ran cold. The driver's seat was empty, the airbag deployed, but there was no sign of the driver. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. I stepped back, my heart pounding, and quickly returned to our SUV. I told my family what I'd seen, and we decided it was best to turn back and find another route. But as I shifted the SUV into reverse, the hair on the back of my neck stood on end in the dim light. I could see figures emerging from the woods, shrouded in darkness. They moved silently, deliberately, and with an unsettling sense of purpose. Panic searched for me as I realized they were headed straight for us. Without hesitation, I slammed my foot on the gas pedal and reversed down the narrow lane. As fast as it could, branches scrape against the sights of our SUV. As we hurtled backward, my family's terrified screams filling the air, we finally emerged from that nightmarish corridor, tires screeching as we rejoined the main road. I didn't stop until we reached the next town, or I called the police to report what we'd seen. To this day, I have no idea or what those figures were, or what happened to the driver of the right car. But I know one thing for sure: the chilling encounter on that desolate road will haunt me and my family for the rest of our lives. It was a road trip we'll never forget for all the wrong reasons. Late at night, I found myself on a lonely stretch of highway, driving through an area known for its vast forests and scarce civilization. The only source of illumination was the weak glow of my car's headlights, casting eerie shadows on the tall trees lining the road. My hands crept the steering wheel, knuckles white as I pushed further into the darkness. I'd been on the road for hours, exhaustion weighing heavily on my shoulders. The hum of the engine was the only company I had, and it was a lonesome tune. I was eager to reach my destination friends' cabin nestled deep in the woods, but the journey was far from comfortable. As the minutes ticked by, my eyelids grow heavy, and I fought to keep them open. That's when I noticed the car behind me. At first, I thought nothing of a fellow traveler, no doubt. But as the miles passed, I became increasingly aware of the car's presence. It stayed a consistent distance behind me, never deviating or attempting to pass. A cold sweat formed on my brow, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I couldn't see the driver's face, shrouded in darkness and hidden behind tinted windows. Attempting to shake off my unease, I increased my speed, hoping the distance between us would crawl. But the other car matched my pace effortlessly, as if it was toying with me. Panic clawed in my chest, and I debated whether to pull over and let the sinister vehicle pass. Just as I was about to make my move, my car's engine sputtered and coughed, the headlights flickering and dimming. My heart pounded as I realized I was losing power. Panic searched for me as I steered to the side of the road, my vehicle coming to an abrupt halt. In the silence that followed, I watched as a cart that had been tailing me pulled up alongside my own. The driver's window rolled down, revealing a figure trayed in darkness. They spoke, their voice chillingly. County to hand. My mouth went dry, and I hesitated for a moment, considering my options. But fear won out of reason, and I nodded. The stranger exited their car, and in the dim glow of my fading headlights, I saw their silhouette approach as a true mirror. Something about their appearance sent shivers down my spine. They wore a tattered coat, their face obscured by shadows. I couldn't make up their features, but their presence was suffocating. Stranger stopped beside my car and opened the hood, feigning an attempt to diagnose the issue. My heart raced as I realized I had no way of knowing if they were truly here to help, or if this was some sinister trap. I considered making a run for it, but the remote location and my limited options left me paralyzed with fear. The stranger leaned in, lost their voice, a whisper in the darkness. "It's just a minor issue. I can fix it for you." As they worked under the hood, tread nodded my insides. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in mortal danger. Every instinct screamed to me to escape, but fear held me captive. Minutes felt like hours as I watched the strangers in every move. Finally, they stepped back and declared the car Fixed, I thanked them through clenched teeth, my voice. Quivering as I started the engine, I glanced nervously at the road ahead, but before I could drive away, the stranger handed me something, a small, nondescript object. In case you run into trouble again, they said, their voice tripping with menace. I took the object with our word, my heart pounding. As I watched the stranger return to their car, with a last lingering look, they drove off into the night. Leaving me alone on that desolate road, I watched their tail lights disappear into the distance before. Finally pulling back onto the highway, my hands trembling on the steering wheel, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped a nightmare, that the chilling encounter with that stranger could have ended far worse. I made it to the safety of my friend's cabin that night, but sleep didn't come easily. The memory of that sinister figure and their unsettling offer haunted my thoughts to this day. I can't help but wonder what might have happened if I hadn't been so lucky, or if luck had nothing to do with it all. It was a moonless night. As I drove back from a Kring work conference, the miles stretched endlessly in front of me, and the only companions were the rhythmic hum of my tires on the asphalt and the occasional crackling of my car radio. I'd been on the road for hours, my eyelids heavy with exhaustion, and the desolation of the empty highway did little to keep me alert. As my car pushed further into the night, I fought to keep my drooping eyes open, knowing that sleep was afar off. Luxury, my grip on the steering wheel tightened, fingers aching with tension. That's when it happened. An unexpected figure emerging from the darkness, a tear graceful and oblivious, stepped on the road ahead. Panic searched for me. As I swerved to avoid a collision, the tires screeched, and the world spun into chaos. Moments later, I found myself in the midst of a deep ditch, my car's headlights casting airy shadows on the tall trees around me. Dazed and disoriented, I tried to make sense of what had just happened. It wasn't the tears that troubled me. It was the crushing silence that followed the accident. No crickets chirped, not night creatures stirred. It was as if the world held its breath. I stepped out of my car and scanned the area with unease. Moonlight struggled to penetrate the thick canopy, leaving everything shrouded in darkness. With trampling hands, I retrieved my phone from the cloth compartment, hoping to call for assistance. But as I held the phone, dread washed over me. There was no signal. Panic knotted my stomach as I realized the predicament. I was stranded on a deserted road, miles from any help. I had no choice but to start walking in search of assistance. As I stumbled through the woods, my path lit only by the faint moonlight filtering through the leaves, I couldn't help but think that this was the beginning of my worst nightmare. My footsteps echoed in the stillness, a haunting reminder of my isolation. After what felt like an eternity, I finally came upon a small clearing where the road continued. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As I approached my car, I was met with an unsettling sight: the shattered window of my vehicle and the unmistakable signs of bright. My heart sank as I realized that all I'd been wandering in the darkness. Someone had taken advantage of my vulnerability. My belongings were STWN, about my laptop gone, and my wallet emptied of cash. Panic turned to anchor as I comprehended the violation. I'd endured. A chill ran down my spine as I considered the implications. Had the deer been a mere distraction, a ploy to lure me from my car while someone ransacked? It seemed like the only plausible explanation. With a sense of foreboding, I searched the surrounding woods, half expecting to find the thief lurking in the shadows, but the night remained silent and impenetrable, revealing nothing of the intruder's identity. I knew I had to make a decision: continue down this desolate road in search of help, or turn back and return to the scene of the bright candle. Neither option was appealing, but I couldn't stay in the dark woods any longer with a happy heart. I retraced my steps, returning to the violated vehicle. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the sensation that unseen eyes were tracking my every move. Anxiety clenched in my chest. As I approached the car, I carefully sifted through my belongings, my heart sinking further as I realized the extent of what had been taken. But Anita Kaas's one item remained: an envelope, carefully placed on the passenger seat. I hesitated before opening it, fearing what I might find inside. Was a handwritten note, its contents chillingly simple: "You're now alone." The words tend to shiver down my spine. It was clear that I was being watched, stalked by an unseen predator. In the darkness, panic threatened to consume me. As I realized I was at the mercy of the sinister stranger, I had no choice but to continue down the road, praying that I find help before the mysterious figure made their presence known. Every rustling leaf, every distant sounds, and my heart racing in this, and the sensation of being hunted never left me. As I walked further into the night, the moon hanging like a specter in the sky, I couldn't help but wonder who this person was. And what they wanted from me, was it simply the thrill of the chase, or was there something far more sinister at play? Hours passed, each one feeling like an eternity, until finally I saw the distant glow of civilization relief search for me as I realized I was nearing help, but as I approached I couldn't escape the feeling that this nightmare was far from over. It was a late autumn evening, and I was on a long drive with my 2 young daughters to visit family. The road stretched on for miles, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, we decided it was time to grab a quick dinner. We pulled into a small, dimly lit diner that seemed like it had seen better days. As we settled into a booth, I couldn't help but notice T and sitting at the counter they were, dressed in worn-out jeans and leather jackets, their eyes fixed on us with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. I tried to ignore their gaze, chalking it up to coincidence, but the feeling of UNE's linger. We order our food and try to engage in casual conversation, but my daughter seemed just as aware of the 2 men. As I was, their laughter was strained, and they couldn't eat quickly enough. As we paid our bill and prepared to leave, I discreetly glanced over my shoulder to check if the men were still at the counter. My heart sank when I saw them rise from their seats, leaving their untouched plates behind. It was clear they intended to follow us with a sense of urgency. I ushered my daughters out of the diner, the bell above the door tingling. As we stepped into the chilly night, the 2 men were right behind us, their happy footsteps echoing ominously. I quickened her pace, hoping to put some distance between us, and the strangers feared not at me as I realized it would run an unfamiliar town far from anyone who could help us. We reached our car and piled in my hands, trembling as I fumbled for the keys. The engine wore to life. Just as the 2 men reached the parking lot, I slammed the car into gear and peeled out of the lot tires, screeching. As we merged onto the highway, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the men climb into a black pickup truck. Panic surged through me as I realized they were following us onto the highway. Desperation set in as I sped down the dark, winding road. My daughters were terrified in the back seat, and I did my best to reassure them, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. I made a series of quick turns, hoping to lose our pursuers, but they stuck with us, their headlights looming ominously in our rearview mirror. It was clear they were determined to follow us, and I couldn't fathom why. My mind raced, and I remembered passing a police station just a few miles back. With a surge of hope, I decided to make a break for it and pulled onto the shoulder to execute a U-turn. My heart pounded in my chest as I saw the men do the same. We raced back toward the police station, the distance between us and our soar closing with every second. I pray that we make it in time, that the sight of a police station would deter them. As we pulled into the station's parking lot, I let out a sigh of relief. I parked the car and jumped out, my daughters following close to eye. I scanned the area, searching for 2 men, but they were nowhere to be seen. We hurried inside, and I explained the situation to the officers on duty. They assured us they keep an eye out for the men, had offered to escort us to our family's home with the police by our side. We finally felt safe, and the rest of our journey passed without incident. But the memory of those 2 men, their predatory stares, and relentless pursuit haunted my dreams for weeks. I couldn't help but wonder what their intentions had been that night and why they had singled us out late at night. I found myself driving back from my mom's place. The journey was nothing out of the ordinary, a familiar route I had taken countless times before. The only difference was the time. It was pitch black outside, and the desolate road stretched ahead, illuminated only by the dim glow of my headlights. My mom lived in a quiet, remote area, and the drive back home was always a peaceful one that night. However, an uneasy feeling settled in the pit of my stomach as I navigated the winding roads. A silence was almost suffocating, broken only by the hum of the ancient and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. As I rounded a bend, I noticed a set of headlights in my rearview mirror. A car had appeared seemingly out of nowhere and was tailgating me closely. I felt my heart rate quicken as their pride beings poured into my rear window. I decided to speed up, hoping the car would eventually pass me by. But no matter how fast I went, the car remained right on my tail like a shadow in the night. Panic began to fall up within me. Who were these people, and why? I was stranded on a deserted road, miles from any help. I had no choice but to start walking in search of assistance. As I stumbled through the woods, my path lit only by the faint moonlight filtering through the leaves, I couldn't help but think that this was the beginning of my worst nightmare. My footsteps echoed in the stillness, a haunting reminder of my isolation. After what felt like an eternity, I finally came upon a small clearing where the road continued. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As I approached my car, I was met with an unsettling sight: the shattered window of my vehicle and the unmistakable signs of bright My heart sank as I realized that all I'd been wandering in the darkness, someone had taken advantage of my vulnerability. My belongings were SDWing about, my laptop gone, and my wallet, emptied of cash. Panic turned to anger as I comprehended the violation I'd endured. A chill ran down my spine as I considered the implications had the deer been a mere distraction employed to lure me from my car. While someone rancid, it seemed like the only plausible explanation was a sense of foreboding. I searched the surrounding woods, half expecting to find the thief lurking in the shadows, but the night remained silent and impenetrable, revealing nothing of the intruder's identity. I knew I had to make a decision: continue down this desolate road in search of help, or turn back and return to the scene of the bright candle. Neither option was appealing, but I couldn't stay in the dark woods any longer with a happy heart. I retraced my steps, returning to the violated vehicle. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the sensation that unseen eyes were tracking my every move. Anxiety clenched in my chest. As I approached the car, I carefully sifted through my belongings, my heart sinking further as I realized the extent of what had been taken. But Anita Casas's one item remained: an envelope, carefully placed on the passenger seat. I hesitated before opening it, fearing what I might find inside was a handwritten note, its contents chillingly simple: "You're now alone." The words tend to shiver down my spine. It was clear that I was being watched, stalked by an unseen predator. In the darkness, panic threatened to consume me. As I realized I was at the mercy of the sinister stranger, I had no choice but to continue down the road, praying that I find help before the mysterious figure made their presence known. Every rustling leaf, every distant sounds, and my heart racing in this, and the sensation of being hunted never left me. As I walked further into the night, the moon hanging like a specter in the sky, I couldn't help but wonder who this person was, and what they wanted from me. Was it simply the thrill of the chase, or was there something far more sinister at play? Hours passed, each one feeling like an eternity, until finally I saw the distant glow of civilization. Relief searched for me as I realized I was nearing help, but as I approached, I couldn't escape the feeling that this nightmare was far from over. It was a late autumn evening, and I was on a long drive with my 2 young daughters to visit family. The road stretched on for miles, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, we decided it was time to grab a quick dinner. We pulled into a small, dimly lit diner that seemed like it had seen better days. As we settled into a booth, I couldn't help but notice T and sitting at the counter. They were dressed in worn-out jeans and leather jackets, their eyes fixed on us with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. I tried to ignore their gaze, chalking it up to coincidence, but the feeling of unease lingered. We ordered our food and tried to engage in casual conversation, but my daughter seemed just as aware of the 2 men. As I was, their laughter was strained, and they couldn't eat quickly enough. As we paid our bill and prepared to leave, I discreetly glanced over my shoulder to check if the men were still at the counter. My heart sank when I saw them rise from their seats, leaving their untouched plates behind. It was clear they intended to follow us with a sense of urgency. I ushered my daughters out of the diner, the bell above the door tingling. As we stepped into the chilly night, the 2 men were right behind us, their happy footsteps echoing ominously. I quickened her pace, hoping to put some distance between us and the strangers. Fear not at me as I realized it would run an unfamiliar town, far from anyone who could help us. We reached our car and piled in my hands, trembling as I fumbled for the keys. The engine wore to life. Just as the 2 men reached the parking lot, I slammed the car into gear and peeled out of the lot, tires screeching. As we merged onto the highway, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the men climb into a black pickup truck. Panic surged through me as I realized they were following us onto the highway. Desperation set in as I sped down the dark, winding road. My daughters were terrified in the back seat, and I did my best to reassure them, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. I made a series of quick turns, hoping to lose our pursuers, but they stuck with us, their headlights looming ominously in our rear-view mirror. It was clear they were determined to follow us, and I couldn't fathom why. My mind raced, and I remembered passing a police station just a few miles back. With a surge of hope, I decided to make a break for it and pulled onto the shoulder to execute a U-turn. My heart pounded in my chest as I saw the men do the same. We raced back toward the police station, the distance between us and our soar closing with every second. I pray that we make it in time, that the sight of a police station would deter them. As we pulled into the station's parking lot, I let out a sigh of relief. I parked the car and jumped out, my daughters following close to eye. I scanned the area, searching for the 2 men, but they were nowhere to be seen. We hurried Inside, and I explained the situation to the officers on duty. They assured us they'd keep an eye out for the men, had offered to escort us to our family's home with the police by our side. We finally felt safe, and the rest of our journey passed without incident. But the memory of those two men, their predatory stares, and relentless pursuit haunted my dreams for weeks. I couldn't help but wonder what their intentions had been that night and why they had. Singled us out late at night, I found myself driving. Back from my mom's place, the journey was nothing out of the ordinary, a familiar route I had taken countless times before. The only difference was the time it was pitch black outside and the desolate road stretched ahead, illuminated only by the dim glow of my headlights. My mom lived in a quiet, remote area, and the drive back home was always a peaceful one that night. However, an uneasy feeling settled in the pit of my stomach as I navigated the winding roads of silence, was almost suffocating, broken only by the hum of the ancient and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. As I rounded a bend, I noticed a set of headlights in my rear-view mirror. A car had appeared seemingly out of nowhere and was tailgating me closely. I felt my heart rate quicken as their pride beings poured into my rear window. I decided to speed up, hoping the car would eventually pass me by. But no matter how fast I went, the car remained right on my tail like a shadow in the night. Panic began to fall up within me. Who were these people and why were they following me? I reached for my phone to call the police, but my trembling hands made it difficult to dial. Glancing at the road ahead, I noticed a sign indicating a nearby gas station. It was the only place to pull over for miles. As I pulled into the gas station, the unknown car followed suit parking spaces away. My heart pounded in my chest as I desperately searched for any sign of help. There was no one else around, just the eerie silence of the night. Summoning my courage, I stepped out of my car, hoping to confront the strangers and ask why they were following me. But as I approached their vehicle, my blood ran cold. The driver's window was rolled down, and the driver's seat was empty. My heart raced, and I felt a sense of impending doom. I turned to rush back to my car, but before I could reach it, I heard a soft voice behind me. "Need some help, Miss Startle." I spun around to see a man standing there shrouded in darkness. He was tall and slender, wearing a tattered jacket and a white print hat that concealed most of his face. Fear said me as I realized that he must have been the car that followed me. I stammered out a response, telling him that I was fine and didn't need any help, but he persisted, taking a step closer. The dim light revealed his sinister grin on his face, and I could see his eyes cleaning with malice. Panic set in, and I bolted from my car, jumping in and locking the doors. A man followed, approaching my window with a predatory look in his eyes. He tapped on the glass, making me jump, and I could hear him whispering unintelligibly. I wet the engine and sped out of the gas station, leaving the man behind. My hands were shaking so violently that it was difficult to keep the car steady on the road. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. I kept driving, praying that I would encounter other cars or find a police station. The minutes stretched on like hours, and I constantly checked my rear view mirror, expecting to see the sinister car again. Finally, I spotted the comforting glow of a well-lit convenience store up ahead. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed a couple walking toward their car. I rolled down my window and explained my situation, begging for help. They kindly agreed to stay with me until the police arrived, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The authorities arrived soon after taking my statement and promising to investigate the unsettling encounter. I continued on my journey home, accompanied by a police escort. The rest of the tribe was uneventful, but the memory of that chilling encounter still haunts me to this day. I was driving to the heart of Ohio, believe late at night, the road stretching endlessly before me like a never-ending ribbon of asphalt. The darkness enveloped everything beyond the reach of my headlights, and the only sound was the low hum of my car's engine. I had to keen this route countless times, but that night was different. It was a perfect storm, if you required to it, and solitude, the monotony of the tribe, had lulled me into a sense of drowsiness, my eyelids growing heavy as I fought to stay awake. I had been on the road for hours, chasing a deadline that loomed over me like a storm cloud. My mind was a haze of exhaustion and anxiety. Just as I was beginning to wonder I should pull over, and last I saw something up, I had a lum figure standing on the shoulder of the road. My first thought was that it must be someone in need of help, stranded by their broken-down car. The better part of me told me to keep driving, but my conscience got the best of me, so I slowed down and pulled over to offer assistance. As I approached, the details of the figure became clearer. It was a man, his clothes tattered and dirty, his eyes were hollow, and he wore an expression of despair that sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread wash over me, but I rolled down my window and asked if he needed help. His voice was a trembling whisper as he explained that his car had broken down miles back, and he'd been walking in the darkness, searching for help. He's looked harmless enough, but something about his demeanor set me on edge. I agreed to give him a lift to the nearest gas station, which was about 20 minutes away. He climbed into the back seat, and as I continued down the empty road, he began to make small talk. He told me his name was David, and that he was passing through Ohio on his way to visit family. Those words were friendly. His presence made me uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but I chided myself for being paranoid. Maybe it was just the exhaustion played tricks on me. We drove in silence. For a while, he only sounded a rumble of the engine and the tires on the pavement. It wasn't until I glanced in the rear-view mirror that I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. David was staring at me, his gaze never wavering. I nervously cleared my throat and asked if he was okay. He smiled, but it was a smile devoid of warmth. "I'm just tired," he said, his voice taking on an unsettling edge. "You know how it is driving alone at night." My honey deepened, and I wished I'd never STO. To pick him up, I began to regret my decision, but pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on getting to the gas station and ending this area encounter. As we near our destination, David's behavior became increasingly erratic, started muttering to himself in a hushed, frenzied tone. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but the tone of his voice was unsettling, to say the least. My heart raced as I pulled into Wallet gas station, relief that our strange journey was nearly over. I turned to David and told him we arrived, expecting him to get out of the car and be on his way, but he didn't move. Instead, he turned his case towards me, and his eyes were no longer empty, but filled with sinister intensity. He leaned closer, his hot breath brushing against my ear, and whispered, "I know what you did." Panic coursed through MS. Words hung in the air, chilling me to the bone. What could he possibly know? My mind raced, trying to make sense of his cryptic statement. I had to get out of there, away from this man who had gone from a weary traveler to a menacing stranger. Without a second thought, I flung open the car door and sprinted toward the gas station, shouting for help. The attendants inside the store rushed to my aid, and I quickly explained the bizarre and terrifying encounter. I just had to call to the police, and as I watched from the safety of the gas station, officers arrived and apprehended David. I could see him being handcuffed, his face contorted with anger and confusion. Police questioned me extensively, and I recounted every detail of the unsettling drive. They'd assured me that they would look into David's background and try to determine what he had meant by those chilling WS shaken to my core. I resumed my journey. The offense of that night, forever etched into my memory. I couldn't help but wonder what David had been referring to, and if there was any truth to his cryptic accusation. But one thing was certain: I would never stop to offer a stranger all right again, not after the night on the desolate roads of Ohio. I can track him for hours, my eyelids heavy with fatigue, my mind clouded by weariness. It's a radio plate static, and I'd long given up on trying to find a station that could break the monogamous silence. The only thing on my mind was reaching my destination. A few more hours of driving, and I'd be there. But then, out of nowhere, happened a loud crash. The unmistakable sound of glass shattering my art leaked in my chest as I instinctively swerved to the side of the road, my adrenaline pumping. The windshield before me was splintered into a spider web of cracks. The point of impact, a gaping hole. Fear surged through me as I realized someone had thrown something in my car. I peered through the shattered glass into the inky darkness, trying to make a sense of what had just occurred. But there was nothing, just apparatus. After a moment of disbelief, I decided I had to pull over and assess the damage. I turned on my hazard lights and brought the car to a stop on the desolate roadside. Rain poured outside, adding to the sense of isolation. As I got out of the car, my heart pounded in my chest. Raindrops soaked my clothes as I approached the shattered windows, shards of glass climbing ominously in the dim light. I couldn't see any immediate danger, but Micah told me be cautious. That's when I heard it below, guttural growl likey some wild animal working in the shadows. My heart raced as I skinned the darkness, trying to locate the source of the sound. There, a few yards away, I saw a movement, a silhouette hunched and menacing. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but my voice quivered with fear. The figure remained still, its eyes reflecting the faintest glimmer of light from the car's hazard light said, and as I realized that whatever or whoever was, it didn't intend to answer. With adrenaline surging, I made a split-second decision to retreat to my car. I needed to call for help to get out of this isolated nightmare. But as I turned to dash back to the vehicle, I heard a rush of movement behind me. Before I could react, a second figure emerged in the darkness, blocking my path to the car through me, and I fumbled for my phone, praying I could dial 911 in time. The rain silk screen and trembling fingers slowed me down, each second feeling like an eternity. Just as I managed to hit the call button, I felt a strong grip on my shoulder, pulling me backward. The foam slipped from my hand, and I was violently spun around to face my assailant. It was the first figure, its face obscured by shadows and a mask of malevolence. I struggled against their crisp, my heart pounding like a trunk. My pleas for help were met with Yuri's silence. The rain drowning out any hope of rescue. Panic surged as I realized the situation was growing increasingly dire. Out of nowhere, a third figure appeared from the darkness, a shadowy presence that seemed to materialize from thin air. The trio of assailant closed in on me, their intentions unmistakably malicious. I could see climbers malevolently in their eyes, a sickening hunger that sent shivers down my spine. In that desperate moment, I knew I had to fight for my life. Adrenaline surged through me, and I lashed out with every ounce of strength I had. Blow after blow, I fought back against the attacker, my survival instinct overpowering my fear. I managed to break free, stumbling backward, my vision blurred with pain and terror. But there was no time to rest. I had to get away from these monsters with all the energy I could muster. I turned and sprinted down the dark road, rain-soaked, and into the sounds of pursuit echoing behind me. I ran as fast as my trembling legs would carry me, my mind racing with thoughts of escape, of finding help, of surviving this nightmare. The darkness seemed unending, the road stretching into eternity, and my lungs burned with each frantic breath. After what felt like an eternity, I spotted the faint glow of approaching headlights. Relief washed over me as I stumbled onto the road, frantically waving my arms to flag down the oncoming vehicle. It screeched to a halt, and a concerned driver emerged, their face a mixture of shock and concern. I begged for help, explaining the harrowing encounter that had just unfolded. They immediately called the police, or arrived shortly after an intense search of the area was conducted, but the assailant had vanished into the night. I was taken to the hospital to treat my injuries and provide a statement to the police. They assured me that they would do everything in their power to find the individual responsible for this terrifying assault. My buddy Jake and I were on a road trip, the kind of spontaneous adventure that makes life interesting. It was late, and the only thing that illuminated the desolate highway was our car's headlights. We were both hungry and decided to stop at a rundown convenience store we stumbled upon in the middle of nowhere. The store seemed straight out of a horror movie. Its flickering neon sign cast your shadows on the crackers vault. We parked and exchanged nervous glances, but decided our crawling stomachs were worth the risk. I mean, how bad could it be? We entered the delay lit store, and a cold draft welcomed us. The shelves were sparsely stocked with dusty, expired goods. A single flickering fluorescent light gave the place an eerie glow. A man behind the counter, a crystal fellow in his 50s, gave us a curtain, odd, ignoring the unsettling atmosphere. We began picking out snacks and drinks as we perused the aisles. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. The place was empty except for the cashier, but the unease persisted, all grabbing some chips. Jake whispered to me, "Do you feel that, man? This place gives me the creeps." I nodded in agreement on not forming in my stomach. We quickly made our selections and headed to the counter. The cashier rang up our items with a cold, interested demeanor. Then, out of nowhere, he looked us straight in the eyes and said, "Y'all ain't from around here area?" I chuckled nervously. "No, just passing." To the cashier's expression didn't change as he muttered, "Well, best be on your way." In city voice, we paid and left the store with a happy wooden door creaking shut behind us. The night air felt cooler, but the unease from inside still clung to us. As we headed back to our car, we noticed a group of locals gathered nearby, their eyes poured into us. Suspicion and hostility evident. They whispered among themselves, casting sidelong glances in our direction. It was as if we had intruded upon their territory, and they didn't take kindly to strangers. Jake and I quickened our pace, hoping to avoid any confrontation. But as we reached our car, the group of locals began to close and blocking our path. One of them, a burly man with a scuffy beard, stepped forward, his voice laced with aggression. "Y'all thought you could just waltz in here, outsiders, and leave without so much as I do." My heart raced as I realized we were in a potentially dangerous situation. I tried to diffuse the tension, explaining that we meant no harm and were simply passing through. But my words fell on deaf ears. The leader of the group took a menacing step closer, his buddies closing behind him. He sneered, "City boys, like you all learn some respect. We don't take kindly to your type around here." Before I could react, the situation escalated. One of the local chef, Jake, sending him stumbling backward. I moved to intervene, but another cracked my arm, prevented me from reaching my friend. If your course through me, as I watched Jake being surrounded by the hostile group. They were outnumbered, and there was no way we could find our way out of this. The leader, his face contorted with anger, leaned in close to Jake and spout a chilling threat. "You got two choices, city boy. Hand over your wallets and get out of here, where things are going to get real ugly with no other option." We complied, tossing our wallets onto the crowd. The locals scrapped them and backed away, leaving us shaken and humiliated. As they retreated, the leader issued a final warning. Considering this a lesson, outsiders, don't ever come back. We watched in silence as they disappeared into the darkness, our wallets and dignity stolen. With trembling hands, we got into the car and drove away, the taste of fear and helplessness lingering in the air. We didn't stop until we reached a Wallet gas station miles away, or we finally felt safe enough to report the incident to the authorities. So our wallets were gone. We were thankful to have escaped a chilling encounter with our lives intact. It was a stark reminder that sometimes the most terrifying experiences are the ones who stumble upon in the darkest corners of the world, far from the comfort of familiarity. And as we continued our road trip, we couldn't help but glance nervously at every convenience store we passed, haunted by the memory of that ominous night in the middle of nowhere. Thank you. This happened to me around 4 years ago now. Was driving alone in my old beat-up siding. I had received an urgent call from my dad, who needed a ride from a nearby town. It was past midnight, and the road was dark and nearly quiet. As I sped along the deserted highway, my mind drifted to my dad's situation. He rarely asked for help, so it must have been something serious. Tension built up inside me as I contemplated the unknown. Suddenly, a pair of headlights appeared in my rear-view mirror. Rapidly approaching, the car behind me was tailgating dangerously, and I couldn't make out its make or model. Anxiety surged through me as I glanced at my speedometer. I was already driving above the limit. I switched lanes, hoping the aggressive driver would pass me, but they followed suit. Panic gnawed at me as I realized this wasn't just a careless tailgater. It was someone with malicious intent. My heart raced and gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white as the menacing vehicle continued to shadow me. My mind raced through possible explanations. Maybe it was a road rage incident, or perhaps they were trying to carjack me. Regardless of the reason, I knew I had to act. I attempted to put some distance between us by accelerating, with the driver behind can match my speed, inching closer with every second. If your course through my veins. As I considered my next move up ahead, I spotted a wall of gas station, a beacon of hope in the inky darkness. I made the split-second decision to make a run for it. As I approached the entrance, I prayed that someone would be there to witness what was happening. I swung into the gas station tires, screeching, and rushed out of my car. My heart pounded in my chest as I sprinted toward the store, frantically searching for anyone who could help. The gas station attendant was outside taking a break. I yelled, "Call the police, someone's chasing me." Without hesitation, the attendant grabbed his phone and dialed 911. I explained the situation, my voice trembling, and he assured me that help was on the way. As we waited for police, I watched the menacing car slow down and circle the gas station, its headlights illuminating my desperate face. The driver's intent was clear, that they weren't going to let me escape so easily. When the police arrived, they quickly surrounded the aggressive vehicle construction. The driver was apprehended, and I breathed a sigh of relief as it turned out the person behind the wheel was a complete stranger. Their motive still of a mystery. They were arrested and taken into custody, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to me. I finally picked up my dad, who was equally baffled by the chilling encounter. We drove home together, our conversation filled with questions and unease. At night, as I lay in bed, my mind kept replaying the events on that desolate highway. I had narrowly escaped a terrifying encounter with a stranger whose intentions I would never fully understand. It was a typical Friday night in the city, and I had just begun my shift as an Uber driver. He out chimed, signaling a new ride request. I glanced at my phone, noting the pickup location was in a somewhat desolate part of town. The screen display the name happened as a passenger. As I approached the location, my uni grew. The area was dimly lit with abandoned warehouses and graffiti-covered buildings lining the streets. It was a kind of neighborhood I usually try to avoid, but a job was a job, and I couldn't afford to be picky. I pulled up to the designated spot, and that's when I saw him. And my passenger was standing under a flickering street light, dressed in a tattered coat that seemed out of place in the mild weather. He looked disheveled, his hair intent, and his eyes started nervously as he approached my car. "Are you even?" I asked as he climbed into the back seat. He didn't respond immediately, his gaze fixed on something outside the window. He finally muttered, his voice shaky. I could tell something was off, but I brushed it off as social awkwardness and began to ride. Ethan directed me to our remote address on the outskirts of the city, far away from the bustling nightlife. As we drove, he remained silent, occasionally glancing over his shoulder, as if he expected someone to be following us. The tension inside the car was palpable. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. I glanced in my rearview mirror and noticed Evan's hands trembling in his lap. "Everything okay back there?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Even didn't respond for a moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice quivered. "Can you please try faster? I need to get there as soon as possible." I obliged, pushing the speed limit as we raced through the empty streets. Athens's anxiety was contagious, and I couldn't help but worry about what he was so afraid of. As we approached our destination, I realized we were heading into an even more desolate area, a secluded, wooded spot far from any residential areas or businesses. Panic began to gnaw at me, but I couldn't simply abandon my passenger. In the middle of nowhere, even suddenly instructed me to pull over at an isolated dirt road leading into the woods. "Stop here," he commanded, his voice more forceful now. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to drive away, but I complied. Ethan got out of the car. Without a word, leaving the door ajar, he disappeared into the dark forest, and the sound of his footsteps soon faded. Terrified and unsure of what to do, I sat in the car. For what felt like an eternity, to rational part of my brain urged me to leave, but morbid curiosity kept me rooted in my seat. I needed to know what just transpired. Eventually, I summoned the courage to step out of the car and follow Evan's path in the woods. My phone's flashlight pierced through the thick, eerie darkness, illuminating the trail ahead. As I ventured deeper into the forest, trade washed over me. It was then that I stumbled upon a chilling sight. A shallow makeshift crave. Panic welled up inside me as I realized what I was looking at. Fearful that even might return, I quickly retreated and rushed back to my car. I sped away from that night, nourished, seeing my heart pounding in my chest. I immediately called the police and reported the disturbing encounter. They assured me they would investigate the matter, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped a horrifying fate. To this day, I can't forget that unsettling night and the enigmatic passenger named Even. Had been a long, exhausting day at the office. A clock on my car's dashboard read 11:45 p.m. as I pulled out of the dim Little Land parking lot. My route home took me through a quiet suburban neighborhood, and the streets were nearly deserted at this late hour. A light drizzle had begun to fall, adding to the gloomy atmosphere. I turned up the radio, trying to stay awake during the monotonous drive. My wife and kids were fast asleep back home, and all I wanted was to join them in our warm, cozy house. Little did I know this night would take an unexpected, terrifying turn. As I approached an intersection, my headlights revealed a long figure standing on the side of the road. It was a man dressed in tattered clothing that clung to us in a seated frame. His hair was matted, and he looked like he hadn't bathed in weeks. He held a cardboard sign that simply read, "Help." Feeling a pang of sympathy, I slowed down and rolled down my window. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice tinged with concern. The man turned his vacant eyes toward me, and for a moment I could see the desperation in his gaze. "Please, mister, I just need a ride. I'm freezing out." Here, against my better judgment, I unlocked the passenger door, and the stranger climbed to his presence sent a shiver down my spine. But I told myself I was just being paranoid. "Where are you headed?" I asked as I pulled back on the road. Ted for a moment before muttering, "Just keep tracking straight. I'll tell you when to stop." As we continued down the dark, rainy streets, an eerie silence settled over the car. I couldn't help but steal glances at my passenger's haggard appearance and the unsettling fight he exuded unnervingly. Several minutes passed in silence before he finally spoke again. "Turn left up ahead," he instructed, his voice trembling. I have paid, turning onto a deserted, dimly lit road. The rain was falling harder now, and the windshield wipers struggled to keep up. The atmosphere in the car had grown stifling, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. "Stop here," he suddenly commanded, his voice taking on an urgency that set alarm bells ringing in my ad. I pulled over to the side of the road, my heart pounding in my chest. The stranger wasted no time unbuckling his seatbelt and lunging toward me. In a split second, his cold, clammy hand clamped over my mouth, and his wild eyes poured into mine. "Give me your wallet," he hissed, his voice and menacing whispered. I fumbled to retrieve my wallet from my pocket, my hands shaking with fear. He snatched the wallet from my trembling fingers and quickly rifled through it, extracting all the cash with a final menace. "Sinclair." He shoved the wallet back at me and flung open the car door. Before I could react, he disappeared into the rain-soaked night. I sat there in stunned silence, my breath coming in like a gasp. The realization of what had just happened slowly sank in, and I realized that I had narrowly escaped a potentially life-threatening situation. I waited for a few minutes, my heart still racing, before I cautiously drove away from the desolate road. I knew I had to report the encounter to the police, but the fear and shock still clouded my thoughts. As I finally pulled into my driveway, I couldn't help but glance nervously around, half expecting the stranger to reappear. I hurried inside, locked all the doors, and woke my wife to tell her the horrifying tale at night. As I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that my world had shifted. I was on my way to pick up my daughter Lily from her boyfriend's house. She called, sounding anxious, asking if I could come get her. I didn't ask questions, I just wanted to make sure she was safe. The rain was pouring down in sheets, making this ability nearly impossible. My windshield wipers worked furiously, but they couldn't keep up with the downpour. The dim glow of the streetlights cast long, ominous shadows that seemed to dance and flicker with the rain. As I approached an intersection, the traffic light blinked its ominous red, warning me to stop. I obeyed, my car's engine idling softly. Terrain on the roof was a constant, hypnotic drumming that made me feel drowsy. Suddenly, a pair of blindingly bright headlights appeared in my rear-view mirror. They were so close that I instinctively glanced at my speedometer, thinking maybe I was driving too slowly. But I was doing a speed limit. The car behind me didn't seem to care. It tailgated me relentlessly, its high beams blinding me, in my rear-view mirror. Panic started to creep, and I had heard stories of aggressive drivers on these dark rain-soaked roads. I tried to keep my focus on the red light ahead. The car behind me honked its horn impatiently, and I could see the silhouette of the driver, gesticulating mildly. Cure cried me, and I thought about running the red light just to get away from the Saline attic, but then the situation took a bizarre twist. I heard a siren glancing in my rear-view mirror. I saw flashing blue and red lights. Relief washed over me. It was the police. I signaled and pulled over the side of the road, grateful for their presence too. Officers approached my car, one on each side. They were dressed in full police uniform, complete with badges and utility belts. I rolled down my window and was immediately hit with the stench of rain-soaked wall. "And whether now, do you know why we pulled you over?" The officer on my side asked, his voice slow and authoritative. "No, officer," I stammered, my anxiety returning. "I was just striving to pick up my daughter." The officer nodded. "We've had reports of a suspicious vehicle matching your description in this area. We need to check your license and registration." I handed over my documents, my hands trembling. The officer examined them carefully. His partner, standing by, seemingly uninterested. The rain pounded on the roof of the car, creating a surreal backdrop to this bizarre encounter. The officer handed my documents back and smiled, a sinister, predatory Korean. "Everything seems to be in order, Mom. You're free to go." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As I started to pull away, I glanced in my rear-view mirror and saw the officers watching me, still smiling. That unnerving smile. I drove a few blocks, my heart pounding in my chest. Something didn't feel right. I pulled into a well-lit gas station and picked up my phone to call the police. As I dialed 911, I glanced back at the intersection. I had just left. The police car was still there, part in the shadows, but now it was empty. The 911 operator assured me that officers would be dispatched to investigate. I sat in my car, the rain continuing to pour, feeling exposed and vulnerable. What had just happened? Were those real police officers or imposters? When the real police arrived, they searched the area, but found no trace of the officers I had encountered. They took a statement from me and assured me they would investigate further. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled in the pit of my stomach. As I finally picked up LY and returned home, I couldn't help but replay the strange encounter in my mind. Who were those men, and what had they wanted? The rain had stopped, and the night was still. That I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister had just crossed my path. The incident haunted my thoughts for weeks. I watched the news, hoping for some explanation, but there was never any mention of police imposters in the area. The mystery remained unsolved, a chilling encounter on a dark, rainy night that left me with more questions than answers. My partner and I have been living the nomadic life for a couple of years now, cruising the country in our trusty camper. It had become our home, a cozy haven on wheels. We embraced the freedom it offered, the open road, our constant companion. One chilly, moonless night, we found ourselves on a remote stretch of highway far from civilization. The stars above were the only source of illumination. My partner was at the wheel, and I was launching in the back, lost in my thoughts. The hum of the engine was a soothing lullaby as they gazed out the window, watching the barren landscape slip past miles and miles of darkness, interrupted only by the occasional pair of headlights coming from the opposite direction. We were in the middle of nowhere, and that's exactly how we liked it. Suddenly, my partner's voice sliced through the silence, a tremor of fear threading through their words. "Did you see that?" Startled, I sat and looked out the window, my eyes scanning the inky darkness. "See what?" My partner pointed a trembling finger towards the rear-view mirror. There in the distance were 2 points of light, steadily growing closer. Headlights, maybe. "It's just another traveler," I said, trying to calm their nerves, but something about the situation felt off. The lights were too bright, too aggressive. They seemed to be gaining on us at an alarming rate. My partner gripped the steering wheel tightly, their knuckles white. I'm not so sure about that, as the vehicle approached and revealed itself as a large black SUV. It was tailgating us, the driver apparently in a hurry. My partner, unsure what to do, maintained our speed and stayed in our lane. But the SUV showed no signs of slowing. Down it edged closer and closer until it was almost on top of us, its headlights blinding us. In the pitch black, Ken panicked search for me. What's going on? I shouted, my heart pounded. My partner's voice trembled as they replied, I have no idea, but I don't like it. Desperate to escape the relentless pursuit, my partner decided to pull over onto the shoulder to let the aggressive driver pass. The SUV roared past us, its tires screeching against the asphalt. It didn't slow down, didn't acknowledge our presence in any relief. We watched the tail lights of the SUV fade into the distance, but our relief was short-lived. As the SUV disappeared from sight, we noticed something even more unsettling, a second pair of headlights approaching us from behind. This time, it was a pickup truck, and it was tailgating us just as aggressively as the SUV had. The tread that had momentarily lifted now descended upon us like a suffocating shroud. My partner's voice quivered with fear. What's happening? Why are they doing this? I had no answers, only a growing sense of unease. The pickup truck showed no intention of passing us. Instead, it continued to tailgate, its presence blooming large and menacing in a rear-view mirror. My partner decided to take a different approach this time. They gently accelerated, hoping to put some distance between us and the relentless pursuer, but it was futile. The pickup truck matched our speed, maintaining its unnerving proximity. As minutes turned into hours, or so it felt, the tension in the camper van was unbearable. Every twist and turn of the desolate road seemed to take us deeper into this nightmare. The pickup truck's headlights bore into our souls, and my partner and I exchanged fearful glances. My phone, or lifeline to the outside world, was tucked away in a corner of the camper. It felt like miles away, unreachable. Our thoughts raced each passing moment, intensifying our dread. Are we being targeted? Was this some kind of elaborate game? My partner made a split-second decision. They veered onto a narrow side road, hoping to lose our pursuer. In the maze of unfamiliar terrain reigned. The unpaved road was bumpy, jolting us around in the camper, but it provided a brief respite from the relentless pickup truck. We sped down a winding path, branches scraping against the sides of our van. I held on to anything I could find, the claustrophobic confines of our home, becoming a prison of fear. But just as we dared to help, we had escaped. We saw them, the headlights of the pickup truck, emerging from the darkness, doggedly following her every move. It was as if our tormentor knew this terrain as well as we did. We were trapped in a nightmarish game of cat and mouse with no end in sight. Panic gnawed at the edges of our sanity as we desperately saw a whiteout of this relentless pursuit. The road seemed endless, stretching on into the abyss, and our pursuer showed no signs of giving up. The pickup truck continued to tailgate us, its presence, an unyielding shadow cast over our lives. Ours turned into an eternity as we raced through the wilderness, our camper, then a tiny vessel adrift on a sea of darkness. My partner's knuckles were raw from creeping the steering wheel, her eyes wide with terror. Suddenly, an idea struck me, an insane, desperate idea. I crawled to the back of the van, searching for something, anything that could help us. My hands landed on a can of emergency flares we kept for roadside breakdowns. I pulled one out, my heart pounding in my chest. With trembling hands, I lifted a flare and hurled out the window, aiming for the road behind us. It burst into a fiery red glow, illuminating the night. The blinding light revealed the pickup truck, its driver momentarily blinded by the unexpected flare. It swerved wildly, tires screeching on the grapple. It was our chance, my partner, for the gas pedal, and our camper van wore to life. Hurtling forward, we raced away from the disoriented pickup truck, our hearts pounding with a mix of terror and hope. For a while, it seemed like we had lost our pursuer. The road ahead stretched on empty and quiet. We dared to hope that we have finally escaped from the relentless chase. But just when we thought we were safe, the pickup truck reappeared in a rear-view mirror, its headlights blazing with renewed determination. It was as if it couldn't be deterred, as if nothing could stop it from haunting her every move. Desperation fueled my partner's actions. They pushed our camper van to its limits, hurtling down the winding road as if our lives depended on it. Because they did, I clung to my seat, praying for a miracle. And then, as if in answer to our prayers, we saw the distant glow of approaching headlights. Another vehicle was heading towards us from the opposite direction. We flashed our headlights, hung our horn, anything to get their attention. The approaching vehicle slowed down, its driver sensing something was amiss. As it drew closer, we could see it was a semi-truck, massive and imposing. It blocked a narrow road, leaving no room for the pickup. truck to pass our pursuer had no choice but to come to a screeching halt trapped behind a massive semi. We watched in disbelief as the pickup truck driver realized our escape, was thwarted the driver to see me it out, and approached our camper van. Their face was a mix of concern and confusion. As we explained the harrowing ordeal we had just endured, they offered to stay with us until the authorities arrived, ensuring our safety. The police arrived soon after, and the pickup truck's driver was apprehended. It turned out to be a deranged individual with a history of dangerous behavior. They had fixated on us for reasons we couldn't comprehend. As the adrenaline wore off, the reality of what had happened sunken. We had narrowly escaped a chilling encounter with someone who seemed determined to arm us. The relief was overwhelming, but it was tinged with the knowledge that our lives had been forever changed by that night. We continue her nomadic journey, but the memory of that terrifying pursuit never left us. It was a nightmare that haunted her. Every mile a chilling encounter with the darkest side of humanity, and a reminder that the open road was not always a place of freedom and escape, but sometimes a treacherous path filled with danger and uncertainty. It was a typical Friday night, and I found myself home alone. My husband was away on a business trip, and I relished a rare moment of solitude. I decided to spend the evening watching movies, nestled comfortably on the couch with a bowl of popcorn as the clock neared midnight. The sound of rain tapping against the windows filled the quiet house. I was engrossed in a thriller when unexpected noise shattered the silence. I knocked at the front door. I paused the movie, my heart pounding as a string to listen. Another knock, louder this time, echoed for the house. My hones deepened. Who would be visiting at this hour, especially on such a stormy night? I cautiously approached the door, appearing through people. On man stood there, trenched by the pouring rain, his face partially obscured by the hood of his raincoat. He held a feeble smile on his lips, an attempt to appear harmless. His shaggy hair was plastered to his forehead. To the closed door, he shouted, "Excuse me, Mom, I hate to bother you, but my car is broken down a few blocks away. Can I use your phone to call for help?" A chill ran down my spine as my instinct screaming at me to be cautious. I hesitated for a moment before finally unlocking the door's chain lock and cracking it open just enough to speak. "Who are you? What do you need?" I asked, trying to sound firm. He appeared relieved that I'd opened the door slightly. "Thank you so much, Mom. I'm just a bit stranded out here, and my phone died in this weather. I promise I won't take long against my better judgment." I opened the door wider, allowing him into a small entryway. Rainwater tripped from his clothes onto the floor as he stepped inside. He appeared disheveled and anxious. I pointed to the landline phone on a small table nearby, silently warning myself to stay vigilant. "The phone's right there. Please make your call and leave." As he reached for the phone, I couldn't help but notice how nervous he seemed. His hands trembled slightly as he dialed a number, and I strained to listen to his conversation. But instead of calling for help, he muttered something inaudible before properly hanging out, turning toward me. He said, "It seems I couldn't reach anyone. Mind if I use your restroom? I'll be out of your way shortly." I was growing increasingly uneasy, my cat screaming at me that something was very wrong, but I couldn't find a good reason to refuse his request. "Fine, it's down the hall to the left, but please hurry." He nodded with a smile that didn't reach his eyes and disappeared down the hall. As soon as he was out of sight, I quickly locked the front door and grabbed my cell phone from the coffee table, ready to dial 911. Things took a turn for the worse. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, my mind racing with all the possible dangers a stranger might pose. Finally, he emerged from a hallway, his coat right over his arm. He looked at me with an eerie crane. "I can't thank you enough for your kindness," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You've been such a good host." I felt a cold tread wash over me as I realized that he had no intention of leaving. Panic welled up inside me, but I tried to maintain composure. "You've overstayed your welcome. It's time for you to go now." His smile widened, revealing a predatory glint in its eyes. "Oh, I'm not going anywhere, you see. I knew you'd be alone tonight, and I couldn't resist the opportunity." My heart counted in my chest as I fumbled for my phone, ready to call for help. But he lunged forward, knocking the phone from my hand and pinning me against the wall. "Fear, correct me," as he whispered. "You should never open the door. The stranger's dear." In that moment, I knew I had to fight for my life with all the strength I could muster. I elbowed him in the stomach and broke free from his grasp. I sprinted toward the front door, my heart racing as I fumbled with a lock. Just as I slung the door open and burst out into the pouring rain, I heard his heavy footsteps behind me. I ran to the nearest neighbor's house, banging on their door, praying they would answer. In time, the door swung open, revealing a startled neighbor. I blurted out that a man was chasing me, and they quickly called the police. Moments later, sirens wailed in the distance. By the time the police arrived, the man had vanished Into the night, they searched the area, but found no trace of him. The ordeal left me shaken to my core, a stark reminder of the dangers that could lurk just beyond our front doors from that night. On I never opened my door to a stranger again, no matter how convincing their story. Might be it was a typical Friday night, and I found myself home alone. I decided to treat myself to a cozy evening, and the rain was tapping lightly against the windows as I curled up on the couch with a good book. Around 8:30 p.m., the sound of thunder echoed through the house, and I realized I was getting hungry. Pizza sounded like the perfect comfort food for a rainy night. So I cracked my phone and dialed a local pizzeria. After a brief conversation with the friendly dispatcher, I placed my order and settled back into my book. The estimated delivery time was about 45 minutes, which gave me plenty of time to lose myself in the pages. As the minutes passed, I began to hear the faint rumble of an approaching motorcycle. I figured it was just a neighbor not giving it much thought. When the doorbell rang, I jumped up, slightly startled by the sudden noise. I opened the door to find a pizza delivery guy, a young man with a cap and a pizza box in hand. He treated me with a warm smile and handed me the pizza, making small tiles. I paid. Everything seemed perfectly normal. I thanked him and closed the door, eagerly digging into my delicious pizza. As I savored each bite, I continued to read my book, losing track of time. It must have been an hour or so later when I heard the same motorcycle approaching once again. I frowned, thinking it was unusual for a delivery guy to return, but curiosity got the best of me, and I went to the window to see what was happening. To my shock, it was insane pizza delivery. Guy parked his motorcycle and walked up to my doorstep with another pizza box in hand. This time his friendly smile had morphed into a strange grin. My heart began to race as I opened the door. "Did you order another pizza?" he asked, his tone oddly cheerful. Now I stammered, my voice shaky. "I only ordered one." He handed me the second box, still cringing, and insisted it was paid for. I was too nervous to argue, so I took it. But as soon as I closed the door, sinking feeling crooked me, something was seriously wrong. I called the pizzeria, immediately wanted to confirm whether they had sent a second pizza, or if this was some bizarre prank. The dispatcher on the other end sounded confused and assured me that they hadn't received any new orders from my address. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the unsettling truth. I was alone in my house with a strange man who had somehow duplicated the pizza to delivery and showed up at my door a second time. Terrified, I decided to call the police, explaining the bizarre situation. They promised to send an officer right away, instructed me to lock all the doors and windows and stay on the line with them. As I waited anxiously, I glanced out the window and saw the pizza guy still standing there, now staring intently at my front door. It felt like an eternity. Before the police finally arrived, they confronted the man outside, and I could hear a heated exchange of words through the closed door. Eventually, they handcuffed him and took him away in their squad car. An officer came inside to take my statement, assuring me that they would investigate further. I learned that this guy had a history of stalking behavior and had been fired from the sewer months ago. To relief that washed over me was immense, but to lingering fear of what could have happened that night haunted me for weeks. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched and followed, and I installed security cameras around my home. In the end, it turned out to be a disturbing and chilling encounter with a man who had sinister intentions. I shudder to think about what might have occurred if I hadn't been cautious and called the police. The memory of that rainy night still sends shivers down my spine, a constant reminder that danger can sometimes work behind the most ordinary circumstances. It was a chilly, moonless night, and I found myself alone at home. My husband was away on a business trip, and the solitude felt eerie in the silence of our suburban house. I had just settled into bed, wrapping myself in the warmth of the blankets, when my phone rang, its shrill tones shattering the stillness. I glanced at the clock, and it read 2 a.m. Who could be calling at this ungodly hour? I reluctantly picked up the phone, feeling a sense of unease creep over me. "Hello," I said, my voice trembling. The voice on the other end was low and familiar, sending shivers down my spine. "Did you miss me, darling?" My heart leaped into my throat. I knew that voice all too well. It was my ex-boyfriend, Mark. We had parted ways under unpleasant circumstances, and I had hoped never to hear from him again. "How did you get this number?" I demanded, my voice quivering. Mark chuckled, a sinister sound that seemed to lose through the phone. "I have my ways, sweetheart. I've been watching you." No, my blood rang cold as his words sink in. The very idea that Mark could be watching me filled me with dread. I glanced around the dimly lit room, paranoia consuming me. "What do you want, Mark?" I asked, my voice quaking with fear. He went on recounting personal details about my day, mentioning places I had been in things I had done, panic surged through me, and I realized that it had been spying on me, tracking my every move. Terror began to consume me as Mark continued his unsettling monologue. He spoke about our past, our relationship, and how he believed we were destined to be together. He professed his love, but it was tainted with an eerie obsession on coming for you, my love. He declared before hanging up. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me and mind racing. His contempt aided the meaning behind his ominous words. Was he really on his way to my house? I quickly dialed 911, explaining the situation to the dispatcher. The police promised to send an officer to check on me. But the minutes dragged unlike ours as I bleated in agonizing fear. Every creak of owls, every gust of wind rattling the windows sent me into a state of heightened paranoia. Finally, the doorbell rang, and I nearly jumped out my skin. I rushed the door and flung it open, relieved to see the uniformed police officer standing there. He assured me that they would patrol the area and offered to stay nearby until nagging for my safety. I agreed, grateful for the presence of someone to protect me from Mark's deranged intentions. The rest of the night was spent in a state of vigilance. The officer patiently comforted me while we awaited any sign of Mark, but he never showed, and as dawn broke, the officer left with a stern warning to call immediately if Mark reservist. Over the following weeks, I lived in constant fear, looking over my shoulder. At every turn, police were never able to apprehend Mark, and I began to doubt whether I would ever find peace. Chilling encounter had left me traumatized, a prisoner in my own home. I had just moved into a quiet suburban neighborhood, seeking a fresh start in life. The past few days have been filled with unpacking boxes and getting used to the unfamiliar surroundings. As I settled into my new home, the sense of isolation began to creep in. It was a peaceful neighborhood, but the unfamiliarity of it all was unsettling. One evening, as the clock ticked toward 11 p.m., I was home alone. My new house felt strange in the dim flow of the living room lamp. I was lounging on the couch, trying to unwind after a long day, when the doorbell rang, shattering the silence of the night. I glanced at the clock, puzzled by the late-night visitor. Who on earth could it be at this hour? I cautiously approached the front door and peered through the peephole. On the other side stood a man, middle-aged and average-looking, dressed casually. I hesitated for a moment, but decided to open the door. Smiled warmly, which put me slightly at ease. Hey, their neighbor, he created, extended his hand for a handshake. I lived just down the street, and I wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood. Believe that it was just a friendly neighbor. I shook his hand and introduced myself. He seemed like a friendly guy, and I figured it was a nice gesture to introduce myself to someone in the neighborhood. We chatted about the area, and he even shared some helpful tips about living there. But as the conversation continued, something began to feel off. He started asking more personal questions about my work, my daily routines, and whether I live alone started ringing in my head. Why was he so curious about my life? I began to feel uncomfortable and try to steer the conversation away from personal topics. However, he persisted, pressing me for information. His friendly demeanor had shifted, and he seemed increasingly fixated on prying into my life. My anxiety grew, and I made an excuse about needing to get up early the next day, hoping he would take the hint and lean. But he didn't budge. Instead, he insisted on coming inside for a cup of coffee, which I adamantly declined. As I stepped back from the doorway, I noticed his demeanor change again. His friendly smile had transformed into an unsettling grin. He took a step forward, invading my personal space, and said in a low, menacing voice, "I think I should come in." Panic search for me. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and backed away, my heart racing. He began to pound on the door, shouting angrily, demanding to be let in. Fear coursed through my veins as I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 as quickly as my trembling hands were allowed. The operator assured me that help was on the way, and I huddled in the corner of my living room, clutching my phone. The man outside continued to bang on the door, growing increasingly agitated. He threatened to break in, his words becoming more menacing with each passing moment. Minutes felt like hours as I waited for the police to arrive. I could hear the sirens in the distance, growing louder, a welcome sound that brought relief. The pounding on the door ceased as the police pulled into my driveway, and the man was apprehended. Turns out the man wasn't a neighbor at all, but a complete stranger who had been lurking in the area. His intentions were unclear, but the terror he had instilled in me that night would linger for a long time. As the police took him away, I felt a wave of gratitude for their swift response and for my instincts that had told me something wasn't right. My parents had finally decided to have a date night after weeks of nonstop work. As a teenager, I was thrilled to have owls to myself for the Evening, I had grand plans for a night of binge watching my favorite TV shows and indulging in all the snacks I could find in the kitchen. Claws felt eerily quiet as I settled in for the evening. I turned on all the lights to dispel any shadows that might play tricks on my imagination. It was just me, my dog Max, and a bag of potato chips. The sound of rain outside added to the cozy atmosphere, and I felt safe and snug on couch hours past as. I watched episode after episode in my parents' absence. Was almost forgotten that was until I heard the faint sound of creaking from upstairs. Max, my usually fearless and boisterous German shepherd, had perked up his ears alert. I muted the TV and strained to listen. It was quiet for a moment, and I thought maybe I had imagined it, but then unmistakable footsteps echoed from above. My heart began to race. My parents had left me alone, and I was on edge. Is someone there? I called out, trying to sound confident. There was no response, just the sound of the rain drumming on the windows. I considered calling my parents if I didn't want to worry them on their date night. It was probably just my imagination playing tricks on me. I thought. I reluctantly resumed my show, but my honey's lingered. Max remained vigilant, his eyes fixed on the staircase. That's when I heard a door creaking open upstairs. Panic seized me. There was no denying it. Now someone was in the house. I cracked my phone and texted my parents, hoping they would see my message without being disturbed on their date. I think someone's in the house. I typed, my fingers trembling. I waited, watching the screen, praying for a response. And in its past like hours, and still no reply. I couldn't wait any longer. I decided to call 911. As I spoke to the dispatcher, my voice trembled as I described the situation. They assured me that police were on their way, and to stay on the line with Max by my side. I crept to the hallway and glanced up the stairs. The faint glow of the upstairs hallway light revealed a dark figure standing at the top of the stairs. My blood ran cold. It was a man, a stranger, and he was just standing there watching me. Tears swelled up my eyes, and I stifled a scream as I retreated back to the living room. Or clutching my phone, I had whispered to the dispatcher that there was someone in the house, and they urged me to lock myself in a room. I dashed to the nearest bedroom, slammed the door shut, and barricaded with whatever furniture I could find. Max was with me, parking furiously. My parents still hadn't replied to my messages, and my fear grew with each passing second. The sound of sirens approaching outside was a lifeline. The police had arrived. I explained my location to the dispatcher and told him I could hear the intruder moving around upstairs. Minutes later, I heard the unmistakable sound of heavy boots coming down the stairs. The intruder was heading my way. My heart pounded, and I was ready to defend myself and Max with anything I could find. But then I heard the voices of the police officer. They were shouting for the intruder to drop to the ground. There was a struggle, followed by the sound of handcuffs clicking into place. It was over. The police burst into the room, their guns drawn, ensuring the intruder was apprehended. I felt a rush of relief, but my hands were still trembling. The man was arrested and taken away in the back of a police car. As the officers took my statement, my parents finally arrived home, shocked and horrified by what had occurred. It turned out that the intruder had broken in, thinking the house was empty, but had been startled by Max and my presence. I shudder to think of what might have happened if I hadn't locked myself in a room and called the police that night. I learned a valuable lesson about the importance of staying vigilant. Even when you think you're safe at home. It had been 3 long months since I lost my husband. The crease still hung heavy in the air, and our once cozy home felt emptier with every passing day. I was struggling to adjust to life as a widow, trying to find solace in a routine of everyday tasks. One chilly night, I was alone in the house. The solitude had become my constant companion, and I had grown accustomed to the silence. I was in the living room, engrossed in a book, attempting to escape my sorrow through the pages of mystery novel. The rain outside patterned gently against the windows, providing the soothing background noise. As I turned the pages, my thoughts drifted back to my husband. He had been the love of my life, and his absence left a void that could never be filled. Our home was a testament to the life we had built together, and the memories within these walls were bittersweet reminders of happier times. That's when I heard an unmistakable creaking sound, like the back door slowly inching open. Panic searched for me, and I froze in my seat. My husband had always been the one to handle home security, and now I was alone, feeling vulnerable and exposed. I strained my ears, hoping it was just my imagination, but then I heard another noise, a faint shuffling sound like footsteps on the hardwood floor. My heart raced, and I knew I had to act. I gently set my book aside and tiptoed to the hallway, clutching the phone in my trembling hand. I reached the hallway and peered around the corner, my pulse pounding in my ears. The back door was slightly ajar, and the dim light from the kitchen spilled into the hallway. I could see nothing but shadows. Fear said me, but I knew I had to investigate with trembling hands. I cracked an umbrella from the stand by the front door. It was the closest thing I could find that might be used for defense. I edged closer to the kitchen, trying to muffle my footsteps. Max, our loyal Labrador, was curled up by the fireplace, oblivious to the intruder's presence. I entered the kitchen, my eyes starting around, searching for any sign of movement. That's when I saw him, a silhouette standing near the back door. My breath caught in my throat as I watched the figure, a shiver running down my spine. Who there? I managed to choke out my voice, barely louder than a whisper. The figure didn't respond, just stood there unmoving. I took a cautious step forward, my grip on the umbrella tightening. As I got closer, sir, I could make out more details. It was a man, tall and dressed in dark clothing. His back was to me, and he seemed to be fumbling with something by the back door. I couldn't see his face, and that uncertainty filled me with dread. Summoning all my courage, I raised the umbrella and called out again, this time with more authority. I said, "Who are you?" The man finally turned around to face me. His features were obscured by a hood, casting his face in shadow. I could feel his gaze on me, piercing to the darkness. And hello, chilling voice. He finally spoke. I just needed shelter from the rain. His words sent a shiver down my spine. His explanation seemed impossible, and I knew I couldn't trust a stranger. Summoning every ounce of strength, I raised the umbrella defensively and took a step back, keeping a safe distance. "You need to leave," I said firmly, my voice trembling but resolute. "I'm calling the police." The man hesitated for a moment, his dark eyes never leaving mine. Then, without a word, he turned and walked toward the back door. I followed him, making sure to maintain my distance, ready to defend myself if necessary. He slipped out into the rainy night, and I watched as he disappeared into the darkness. I quickly locked the back door in my hands, shaking as I fumbled with the latch. It was over, but the terror of the encounter lingered. I called the police, explaining what happened. They arrived within minutes, their presence providing a sense of security that had been shattered earlier. They searched the area, but found no trace of the intruder. As I sat with the officers, recounting the terrifying encounter, I couldn't help but think about my husband. He had always been my protector, and now I had to learn to protect myself. The nights would never be the same, and the scars of that chilling encounter would remain with me forever. In the days that followed, I had the locks changed, installed an alarm system, and adopted a new routine for safety. Sense of security that my husband had provided was gone, but I was determined to rebuild my life and face the future with resilience. It was a cold and rainy night, the kind that made you appreciate the warmth and coziness of your own home. My girlfriend, Sarah, had gone to stay with her mother. For a few days, she wasn't feeling well, and I had insisted that she needed the comfort of her child at home. I was home alone, and the emptiness of the house felt eerie, even with the sound from the TV in the background. I had just settled down on the couch with a ball of microwave popcorn when I heard a loud, urgent knocking on the front door. Startled, I paused the TV and looked at the clock. It was already 10:30 p.m. Who could be visiting at this hour? I cautiously made my way to the front door, my heart pounding with unease. Peering through people, I saw a man standing on my doorstep. He was dressed in plain clothes and had a badge hanging from a lanyard around his neck. He looked official, but something about the situation didn't sit right with me. I cautiously opened the door just a crack, leaving the chain lock securely fastened. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice filled with suspicion. The man gave me a practiced smile and spoke with a sense of urgency. "Sir, I'm an undercover police officer, and we've had reports of a break-in nearby. I need to ask you a few questions. Is it all right if I comment?" Alarm bells went off in my head. I'd always been taught to be cautious about letting strangers into my home, especially late at night. "I'm sorry, but I can't let you," and I replied firmly. "It's if you have questions, we can talk right here." The man's smile faded, and he became more insistent. "It's really important, and time is of the essence. I promise. I won't take long." I hesitated for a moment, torn between wanting to be helpful and the feeling that something wasn't right. Then I made a quick decision. "Hold on, let me call the police station to verify your identity." I closed the door and quickly dialed the non-emergency number for our local police station. As I waited for someone to pick up, anxiety nodded me. The man on my doorstep was still there, no doubt wondering what was taking me so long. A voice answered on the other end, and I explained the situation. The dispatcher assured me that an officer would be sent over to verify the man's identity. Feeling somewhat relieved, I returned to the door and told the man that I called the police station to confirm his status. He seemed unnerved by this and took a step back. I kept the chain lock secured and waited for the officer to arrive. Minutes felt like hours as I stood there, the tension in the air growing thicker. Finally, I saw the flashing lights of a police car approaching. The man on my doorstep must have seen it too, because he turned and hurried away, disappearing into the darkness. The A uniformed police officer arrived, and I explained the entire situation to him. He nodded and told me I had made the right call. He confirmed that there had been no reports of any break-ins in the area and assured me that I had handled the situation correctly. Relieved, but still shaken, I thanked the officer and watched as he drove away. I locked and bolted the door, double-checked all the windows, and even called Sarah to let her know what had happened. She urged me to stay vigilant and cautious. The rest of the night was restless. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled over me. What if I had let that man into my home? What had he really wanted? The unanswered questions haunted me. As I tried to get some sleep, the next morning Sarah returned home. I recounted the strange encounter to her, and she shared my unease. We decided to inform the police about the incident just in case they took our statements and promised to investigate. Weeks passed, and the incident slowly faded from our minds. Life returned to a semblance of normalcy, and the emptiness of the house felt bless Ari with Sarah by my side. Then one evening, I received a call from the police. They had identified the man who had come to my door that night. He wasn't a police officer at all. He had a history of posing as one to gain access to people's homes. The police had apprehended him, and he was now in custody. The news said it chilled down my spine. I had narrowly escaped a potentially dangerous situation. It was a chilling encounter that served as a stark reminder to always trust my instincts and prioritize my safety, especially when home alone that night. As Sarah and I locked up the house and settled into bed, I couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of gratitude for her presence and the safety we found in each other's arms. The nightmare had passed, but the lessons it had taught us would remain forever etched in our minds. It was a sunny afternoon, and I found myself at home alone, enjoying the rare tranquility of an empty house. My husband was at work, and the neighborhood was unusually quiet. The only sounds were the chirping birds and the distant hum of lawnmowers from the neighboring yards. I was engrossed in a book, but I heard a knock on the front door. Glancing at the clock, I wondered who could be visiting at this time of day. As I approached the door, I could see a teenage boy standing on the porch through the frosted glass window. He wore a tattered t-shirt, jeans, and had a lawnmower parked on the sidewalk. I opened the door, and he greeted me with a friendly smile. "Hi, ma'am," he said politely. "I noticed your lawn could use a mowing. I'm trying to earn some extra money. Would you like me to take care of it for you?" I appreciated the initiative and smiled back. "Oh, thank you. I think we're okay for now. My husband usually handles the yard work." The boy nodded, his smile fading slightly, and he stepped back. "All right, no problem. If you change your mind, here's my number." Handed me a small slip of paper with his name, Cuddle, and a phone number written on it. I thanked him and closed the door, returned to my book. I didn't think much of it at the time, but looking back, I wish I had been more cautious. About an hour later, there was another knock at the door. I got up and opened it half, expecting to see Kyle again. And there he was holding his lawnmower. "Ma'am, are you sure you don't want your lawn mowed? It'll look great, I promise," he urged. I sighed, realizing that my husband wouldn't be able to get to it for a while. "Okay, Kyle, go ahead. Just make sure not to make too much noise," he cried, and got to work. I watched him from the window as he expertly maneuvered the lawnmower around the yard. He seemed diligent and hard-working. So I decided to go outside and offer him a cold drink. I approached Kyle, who had taken off his earbuds, and handed him a bottle of water. "Thanks for doing this," I said, trying to make small talk. "How long have you been doing lawn care?" He accepted the drink and took a sip before answering. "A few years now. It's a good way to make some cash." I nodded, feeling a bit more at ease. "Well, we appreciate it. Just let me know if you need anything else." Kyle continued to work, and I went back inside, relieved to have found a solution for our overgrown lawn. But as I settled back into my book, a feeling of unease began to gnaw at me. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something about the situation didn't sit right. Eventually, I decided to check on Kyle's progress. I stepped out onto the porch. I was puzzled to find the lawn abandoned in the middle of the yard. Kyle's nowhere in sight. My heart began to race, and I called out, "Kyle, are you okay?" Silence. I approached the lawnmower, my anxiety growing with every step. Then I heard a soft, eerie sound coming from inside the house. It was the unmistakable creaking of the staircase. My mind raced as I realized that Kyle must have entered the house without my knowledge. Panic set in, and I had to gather every ounce of courage to ascend the stairs. Each step felt like an eternity. As I reached the top of the staircase, my worst fears were realized. There was Kyle standing in the hallway, facing the wall, his back to me. He was muttering something incoherent under his breath. "Kyle," I whispered, my voice trembling, "what are you doing here?" He turned to face me slowly, his eyes vacant and unblinking. His clothes were smeared with dirt and grass stains, and his hands were clenched into fists. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. "Kyle, you need to leave right now." But instead of responding, he began to advance toward me. His movement, slow and deliberate, was as if he were in a trance. His eyes devoid of recognition. Fear surged through me, and I turned and ran down the stairs as fast as I could, my only thought being to get out of the house. I heard Kyle's heavy footsteps behind me, and I knew I had to make it to the front door. Before he caught up, I burst through the front door, stumbling out onto the porch, and didn't look back until I had reached the safety of the front yard. Kyle was standing in the doorway, his vacant stare fixed on me. I dialed mine to 111, my trembling fingers struggling to press the buttons on my phone. I explained the situation to the dispatcher, and they assured me that officers were on their way. As I waited for the police to arrive, I kept a weary eye on Kyle, who hadn't moved from the doorway. His blank expression never wavered, and it sent shivers down my spine. When the police finally arrived, they detained Kyle and questioned him about his bizarre behavior. He claimed to have no memory of entering the house and appeared genuinely confused about the entire situation. I provided a statement to the police, and they assured me they would investigate further. It was clear that something was seriously wrong with Kyle, and I couldn't help but feel a mixture of relief and unease as they took him away for an evaluation. In the days that followed, I learned that Kyle had a history of mental health issues. He had recently stopped taking his medication, which might have contributed to his erratic behavior. The incident was chilling, a stark reminder of how unpredictable and frightening mental illness can be. I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability that had settled over me. My sense of safety in my own home had been shattered, and I knew it would take time to rebuild my husband, and I took steps to improve our home security. And I couldn't help but wonder how differently things might have ended if I had left my car down just a bit more. That day was a Wednesday night, and I was home alone preparing dinner. In the delay-lit kitchen, the savory aroma of sizzling ground beef and spices filled the air as I cooked tacos for my son and myself. It was a simple evening with the promise of my son returning from a friend's house for dinner. The clock on the wall at 8:30 p.m., and my stomach rumbled in anticipation. I had just set the table complete with all the taco fixings when I heard a faint but persistent knocking at the front door. My heart leaped with excitement, thinking my son had returned earlier than expected and had forgotten his keys. Hastily wiping my hands on a kitchen towel, I made my way to the front door and peered through the people. To my surprise, it wasn't my son standing on the porch, but an older man, a complete stranger's face was hidden in the shadows, and I couldn't make out any features. With caution, I unlatched the chain lock and cracked the door open just a few inches. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice laced with unease. The man seemed friendly enough. Those pressed presence on my doorstep at this hour was unsettling. "I'm sorry to bother you, man." He became voice calm, measured. "My car broke down a couple blocks away, and I don't have my phone with me. Could I use your phone to call for assistance?" I hesitated, torn between the desire to help and my instincts telling me to be cautious. I heard too many stories of scams and cons. "I'm sorry, but I can't let you inside," I replied, trying to sound firm but polite. "I can call for help for you, though." Before I could pull out my phone, his demeanor shifted abruptly. His friendly expression twisted into an unsettling smile, and his eyes bored into mine. "I'm sure we can work something out, ma'am. Let me in, and I'll make it worth your while." My heart pounded as dread washed over me. This was not the innocent request for help, but it seemed at first my instinct screamed at me to shut the door and call all the police. I moved to close it, but the man's foot shot out, watching it open. Panic searched for me as he began to force his way inside. His strength overpowered my attempts to resist. Fear said me as I realized that I was in a life or death struggle with a stranger in my own home. Summoning every ounce of strength and adrenal and fueled courage, I pushed back with all my might and managed to slam the door shut. Locked, looking at just in time, a man outside pounded on the door, his threats and pleas growing more desperate by the second. Tears swelled up in my eyes as I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911. I explained the situation to the dispatcher, my voice trembling. As I pleaded for help, they assured me that officers were on the way. As I waited for the police to arrive, I barricaded myself in the bathroom, clutching the phone tightly in my trembling hands. A man continued to pound on the door, shouting obscenities, and for the minutes felt like an eternity as I listened to his relentless efforts to break. And finally, the sound of approaching sirens pierced the night, and relief washed over me. The police arrived quickly, and I could hear them shouting at the intruder to surrender. The man's resistance was short-lived, and soon he was in police custody. I emerged from the bathroom shaken but unharmed and gave my statement to the officers. They explained that the man had a history of criminal activity and had been wanted for other violent offenses. It sent chills down my spine to think about what could have happened if I had let him inside. After the ordeal was over, I called my son and told him to stay at his friend's house for the night. I couldn't bear the thought of him returning to a home that had just been the scene of a terrifying encounter. It was a quiet Monday evening, and I had settled into my cozy home office. Physically working on my laptop, the soft glow at the desk lamp provided a warm contrast to the darkening room as the sun dipped below the horizon. My husband was away on a business trip, and I relished the solitude. Finding getting work done as I was engrossed in my task, the faint sound of a knock at the door barely registered. I glanced at the clock. It was already 7 o'clock p.m. Who could be visiting at this hour? I rose from my desk and made my way to the front door, feeling a sense of unease. When I opened the door, I was greeted by an unexpected sight. 2 children, a boy and a girl, stood on my doorstep. They looked to be around 10 or 11 years old. The boy spoke up, his voice shaky. "Man, we're really sorry to bother you, but we're trying to get home, and we need $5 for the bus. Can you help us?" My initial suspicion waned as I looked at their earnest faces, and my heart went out to them. I rummaged through my purse and handed them a $5 bill, hoping it would help them on their way. They thanked me profusely, and then the boy hesitated before asking, "Could I use your bathroom, please? It's been a long walk." I considered their request for a moment, torn between being a good Samaritan and the instinctive caution that had always been ingrained in me. Finally, I agreed, leading them down the hall to the bathroom. As they went in Ira, I reached in the door ere an hour passed, and I returned to my work believing that I had done a good deed and that the children were now on their way home. However, as the men, the mystic, by a crowing unease settled in the pit of my stomach. It shouldn't have taken them so long. In the bathroom, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to check on them. As I approached the bathroom, I heard faint noises from inside, shuffling sounds that made my heart race. I pushed the door open, slowly revealing a scene that sent a chill down my spine. The window was wide open, the curtains pillowing in the evening breeze. Panic surged through me as I realized the truth. I had been lured into a trap. Those innocent-looking children had unlocked my window, and now a man was climbing through it, his eyes filled with malice. Before I could react, the intruder was inside my home, blocking my path to the door. Fear and adrenaline coursed through Emma's eye. Scrambled to find a way out. He moved closer, his intentions clear, and I knew I had to act fast with a surge of strength. I bolted toward the kitchen, my heart pounding in my chest. I grabbed a heavy cast iron skillet from the counter, clutching it tightly. As I turned to face the intruder, he advanced with a predatory smile, thinking he had the upper hand by a person going down. Without a fight, I swung the skillet with all my might, striking him square in the face. He let out a scream of pain and stumbled back, crashing into a chair. Bought me just enough time and made a run for it. I dashed out the back door, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear the man cursing and giving chase, but adrenaline fueled my escape. I sprinted through the dimly lit backyard, my breath coming in like a gasp, until I reached my neighbor's house. Pounding on their door, I begged for help, and they quickly called the police. Within minutes, officers arrived, and they apprehended the intruder in my backyard. As they arrested him, I watched a mixture of relief and anger coursing through me. It turned out that the children at the door were pawns in a man's sinister plot used to gain entry into my home. The police assured me that they would be okay and that they would contact their parents. As for the man, he had a long history of criminal activity and had clearly intended to do me harm. In the aftermath of that horrifying encounter, I strengthened the security of my home, installing robust locks and an alarm system. I also shared my story with friends and neighbors, warning them to be vigilant, even in moments of apparent kindness. It was a quiet Thursday morning, and I was going about my usual routine in my small suburban home, living alone. I had grown accustomed to the solitude, finding comfort in the peacefulness of my surroundings, the soft hum of appliances, and the occasional chirping of birds for the soundtrack to my day. As I was sipping on my morning coffee and flipping through the pages of a book, a sudden knock at the door jolted me from my reverie. It was an unexpected interruption, and I frowned, wondering who could be calling at this early hour. My neighborhood was generally safe, but caution was ingrained in me. I appeared to pee, my heart racing slightly. A man stood on my doorstep, dressed in casual attire. His presence seemed harmless enough, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He held up a batch with the name of the electric company, and explained that they needed to read the electric meter in my basement. It seemed like a plausible request, and I hesitated for a moment before deciding to let him in. Leading him through the hallway to the basement door, I felt a shiver of apprehension, an instinctual warning that something was amiss. The man followed closely behind, his footsteps echoing in a narrow stairwell. As we descended into the dimly lit basement, I couldn't help but feel vulnerable. The basement was a place I rarely ventured, and it was filled with the eerie Stillness of forgotten memories. I pointed to the electric meter, a small metal box affixed to the wall. The man nodded and approached it, pretending to inspect it closely. My heart pounded, and I watched him closely, growing increasingly uncomfortable. He was taking far too long for such a simple task. Suddenly, he turned towards me with a sinister smile that sent chills down my spine. It was then that I realized he was an imposter or threat who had deceived his way into my own. Panic surged through me as he moved closer, blocking my path to the basement stairs. My mind raced, desperately searching for a way out of this nightmare. I had to stay calm to think. Clearly, I knew that my only chance of survival was to outsmart this intruder. I think cooperation, try and maintain a facade of vulnerability. But as he reached out to Krabby, I made a split-second decision. With all the strength I could muster, I heard a nearby toolbox towards him, catching him. Off guard, it struck him on the shoulder, causing him to stumble backward and lose his balance. Leasing the opportunity, one sprinted up the stairs, my heart pounding like a trunk. I reached the safety of the ground floor and bolted out the front door, not daring to look back. I knew that my life depended on reaching help. Quickly, I ran to my neighbor's house, pounding on the door and gasping out the terrifying ordeal I had just experienced. They called the police, who arrived promptly to apprehend the intruder. It turned out that he had a history of similar crimes, preying on unsuspecting victims by posing as a utility worker. In the aftermath of that horrifying encounter, I fortified my home security, installing locks, alarms, and surveillance cameras. I also shared my story with my neighbors, warning them to be vigilant against potential threats. The night was settling and casting long shadows throughout my quiet suburban home. My husband was away on a business trip, and I was alone. The situation that had become routine over the years. As I settled onto the couch with a book and a warm blanket, I relished the solitude, but little did I know that this night would be unlike any other. As I turned the pages of my book and crossed in the world of fiction, I began to hear faint noises from the back of the house. The creaking of the old wooden floors beneath me sent a chill down my spine. I tried to dismiss it as the usual sound of an aging house, but something about it felt different tonight. My nerves were already on edge, knowing that I was the sole inhabitant of the house. I put the book down and listened intently. The noises continued, growing more distinct and unsettling. Footsteps. I thought someone was moving around in my home. Fear said me, and I reached for my phone to dial 911. My trembling fingers struggled to press the buttons as I whispered my trust to the dispatcher. They assured me that help was on the way, but the minute street on feeling like hours, I decided to act cautiously, realizing that my safety depended on my ability to remain composed. I grabbed a happy candlestick from the coffee table, the only weapon within arm's reach, and made my way toward the source of the noises. The intruder had to be stopped, and I was determined to protect my home. The intruder's steps grew louder as I approached the hallway leading to the back of the house. The darkness seemed to close in around me, and I wished I had turned on more lights before my husband's departure. I could see the faint outline of a figure there back to me as they moved through the hallway. With each step, my heart pounded in my chest, and my grip tightened on the candlestick. I was torn between confronting the intruder and finding a place to hide, but there was no turning back now. As I rounded the corner, I raised the candlestick, ready to strike. But when I saw the intruder's face, my breath caught in my throat. It was my husband, or at least someone who looked exactly like him. The shock was overwhelming, and I stumbled backward, my grip on the candlestick loosening. He turned to face me, his expression cold and unfamiliar. "Who are you?" I stammered, my voice trembling. He smiled, and he reeked that sent shivers down my spine. "You don't recognize me, do you?" My mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. My husband was miles away on his business trip, and this imposter before me defied explanation. He took a step closer, his eyes locked onto mine. "Where is he?" I demanded, my fear giving way to anger. The imposter's smile whitened, and he raised a finger to his lips. In a hushing gesture, "He's not here, and he won't be coming." Back the terror searched for me as I realized the gravity of the situation. This man, whoever he was, had invaded my home and assumed my husband's identity. My fingers tightened around the candlestick once more, and I took a step back, my mind racing for a way to escape. Just as he advanced toward me, a barrage of police sirens filled the night, their flashing lights casting in your glow through the windows. The intruder froze, his smile fading, and he bolted towards the back door. I watched as the police apprehended him, taking him away in handcuffs. Turned out that the imposter had been stalking my husband during his business trip, gathering enough information to infiltrate our home and deceive me. The police assured me that he would be held accountable for his actions, but the ordeal left scars that ran deeper than I could have ever imagined. My husband returned from his trip, and we found solace in each other's presence, grateful for our safety. We reinforced the security of our home, knowing that the sanctity of our haven had been preached. The memory of that terrifying night still haunts my dreams, a constant reminder that even in the quietest moments, darkness can find a way. It was an ordinary weekday, and I found myself alone at home. My husband was at work, and my friends were busy with their own lives. The solitude didn't bother me. In fact, I enjoyed the occasional peaceful day to myself. Little did I know that this day would soon turn into a nightmare as I went about my daily routine. The doorbell rang. I glanced at the clock, wondering who could be visiting at this hour. When I opened the door, a man stood there dressed in a uniform with a delivery company logo. He held a package in his hand. "Good morning, ma'am," he said with a polite smile. "I have a parcel for you. Could you please sign for it?" I was taken aback because I wasn't expecting any deliveries. I thought it might be a surprise gift from a friend or family member. I nodded and accepted the package, ready to put my signature on his electronic device. That's when things took an unsettling turn. The delivery man extended the device toward me, but then he muttered, "Oh, my pen seems to have run out of ink. Do you have one I could borrow?" His request seemed harmless enough, but a nagging feeling of unease crept over me. I hesitated for a moment, weighing the situation. After all, I didn't want to be rude. With a forced smile, I told him to wait and retreated inside to find a pen. My heart pounded as I searched for a pen, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. When I finally located one, I clutched it tightly in my hand, determined not to let my card down. Returning to the door, I handed him the pen, my eyes fixed on his every move. He accepted it with a smile and pretended to scribble on the device. But as I'd watched, I noticed something chilling. He hadn't actually pressed a pen on the screen. Instead, he was stalling for time, and his eyes started around the hallway. "Why aren't you signing?" I asked, my voice quivering with suspicion. He hesitated for a moment before responding, "I'm sorry, Mom. I seem to have made a mistake. This isn't your package." After all, relief washed over me as he handed back the package and turned to leave. I couldn't believe my luck had seen my intuition had saved me from a potentially dangerous situation. I closed and locked the door, my heart still racing. But the sense of security was short-lived. As I watched through the window, I saw the man didn't walk away as expected. Instead, he stood on the front porch, his phone to his ear, speaking quietly. I strained to hear his conversation, but couldn't make out the words "fear" correctly. Once again, I knew I had to call the police, but I didn't want to make any noise that might alert him to my actions. I crept into the kitchen and dialed 911, speaking in hushed tones to the dispatcher, explaining the situation and giving her my address. As I hung up the phone, I glanced out the window again. The man was still there, speaking into his phone and pacing anxiously. It was clear that he was waiting for something, or some of my heart sank as I heard the sound of a car engine approaching. A second vehicle pulled up in front of my house, and another man stepped out. They exchanged words briefly before both of them turned to face my front door. Panic searched for me. As I realized I was trapped, I knew I couldn't wait for police to arrive. I had to act fast to protect myself. I quietly moved through the house, locking every window and door, searching for any means of escape. Then as I reached the back of the house, I heard the sound of breaking glass. The intruders had smashed one of the windows to gain access. My heart raced as I considered my options. I couldn't hide forever, and the situation was growing increasingly dangerous. I made my way to the bedroom, my mind racing with fear and adrenaline. I knew I needed a weapon, something to defend myself. I spotted a heavy flashlight on the bedside table, and I cried it tightly, ready to confront the intruders if necessary. I could hear them moving toward the house now, their footsteps growing closer. My heart pounded in my chest as I crouched behind the bedroom door. The flashlight raised, prepared to strike. As the first intruder entered the room, I swung the flashlight with all my strength, striking him in the head. He cried out in pain and staggered back, crashing into the second intruder, who was entering the room behind him there. Momentary disarray gave me the opportunity to flee. I bolted from the room and raced down the hallway, making a beeline for the front door with a surge of adrenaline. I flung the door open and sprinted out into the street, not stopping until I reached a neighbor's house. I pounded on their door, my breath coming in like a gasp as I balked them to call the police. Moments later, I heard sirens approaching, and a wave of relief washed over me. The police arrived, apprehended me. Intruders who were still inside my home. It was later revealed that the two men had sinister intentions and a history of criminal activity. My quick thinking and determination had saved me from a potentially life-threatening situation. In the aftermath, my sense of security was shattered, battered. I installed a security system in my home, and my husband, and I became much more vigilant about safety for her. My girlfriend had gone to pick up our kids from school was quiet, and I decided to make the most of this rare solitude by relaxing on the couch and catching up on some reading as I immersed myself in the pages of a crippling novel. The peace was suddenly shattered by a loud, urgent knocking at the front door. My heart skipped a beat, and I quickly set my book aside, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. I cautiously approached the door, my EY starting toward the people through the fish islands. I saw a man standing on the porch. He was wearing a faded jacket, and his face was obscured by a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. "Who is it?" I called out, my voice shaky. The man didn't respond. Instead, he continued to knock, this time more forcefully. The knocking seemed relentless, as if he was determined to get my attention. I decided to speak again, a lot of this time my apprehension crawling. I asked, "Who is it?" Still there was no response, only the incessant knocking. Fear gnawed me as I contemplated my next steps. I considered calling my girlfriend while the police, but I didn't want to overreact to what could be a harmless situation. Summoning all my courage, I decided to confront the stranger and find out what he wanted. I slowly unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door a crack, keeping the security chain in place to prevent him from entering. What he wanted, I demanded, my voice steadier now. But my heart racing. The man finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine. His expression was a mixture of anxiety and desperation. "Please, you have to help me," he pleaded. His words sent a shiver down my spine. I couldn't help but feel a sense of tread wash over me. "Help you with what?" I asked cautiously. "I'm being chased," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. "I need to hide there after me." My mind raised, and I couldn't help but wonder whether this was some sort of elaborate ruse or a desperate ploy to gain entry into my home. But something about the man's demeanor seemed genuine, and the fear in his eyes appeared all too real. "I can't help you," I said firmly, deciding it was best to keep the stranger at bay. I considered my options. "You need to leave." As I attempted to close the door, the man's desperation reached a fever pitch. He shoved his foot into the narrowing gap and pushed against the door with all his strength. Panic searched for me as I struggled to keep the door from swinging open. "Please," he begged, his eyes wide with terror. "They're coming. You have to let me in." With an adrenaline-fueled burst of strength, I managed to force the door shut, slamming and locking it. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood on the other side, my hands trembling. The man continued to pound on the door, his police growing more frantic. "You don't understand. They're going to kill me." I knew I had to make a quick decision. I reached for my phone and dialed 911, explaining the situation to the dispatcher as calmly as I could, all while the stranger continued to pound it on the door behind me. Within minutes, I heard the sirens approaching. The man outside must have heard them too, because he suddenly stopped banging on the door and fled. The police arrived shortly afterward, and I gave them a detailed description of the man and his bizarre behavior. As I watched the officers search the area, a sense of relief washed over me. They never did find the mysterious stranger, and I was left with unanswered questions about who he was and why he had sought refuge at my doorstep. My wife had gone out for some groceries. Shopping our suburban neighborhood was usually peaceful, and I had never experienced anything out of the ordinary during my time living here. As I settled down on the couch, flipping through TV channels and trying to find something to pass the time, I couldn't help but feel the creeping honeys that often accompany solitude. The house seemed quieter than usual, and the creaks and groans of the old building took on a more sinister tone in the absence of my wife's presence. I shook off the uneasiness and tried to immerse myself in a movie, hoping it would provide a temporary distraction. But as the film played, and I couldn't help but notice every little sound, every subtle shift in the house's atmosphere. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of the window being open. My heart lurched in my chest as I froze, training to listen. It couldn't be my wife. She'd taken the car, and her return was still hours away. I'm new to the TV and sat in tense silence, my ears finally tuned to the sound of the house. I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving through the hallway just beyond the living room. Who set me like a vice, and I knew I couldn't stay put. With my heart pounding, I crept off the couch and moved quietly toward the hallway, my mind racing. I had to confront whatever was happening and protect our home. As I peeked around the corner, my worst fears were confirmed. A man, a complete stranger, was standing in the hallway, illuminated by the soft filtered light from a nearby window. He had a scruffy beard and wild eyes like a predator sizing up its prey. Our eyes locked, and I was paralyzed with terror as I watched him slowly raise a finger to his lips, signaling for silence. My instinct screamed at me to run, to call the police. If I was trapped in that moment, unable to tear my gaze away from this intruder, the man took a step toward me, And that's when panic finally jolted me into action. I turned and sprinted for the front door, my heart pounding in my chest like a sledgehammer. As I fumbled with the locks, I could hear him pursuing me, his heavy footsteps echoing in the narrow hallway with a surge of adrenaline. I wrenched the door open and burst out into the yard, gasping for breath. I didn't dare look back. I ran to the neighbor's house, pounding on their door in sheer desperation. Thankfully, they let me in and called the police. As I sat there trembling and waiting for the authorities to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability and violation. Our safe haven had been invaded, and I couldn't help wonder what might have happened if I hadn't been alert enough to escape. I lived alone in a coy suburban house, a place where I found solace after a long day's work. My routine would predictable: come home, make dinner, watch some TV, and then off to bed. Nothing out of the ordinary ever happened here, and I liked it that way. One evening, as I was getting ready to retire to bed, I heard a faint, unfamiliar sound. It was subtle, like the softest of whispers tearing on the wind. I strained my ears, trying to identify the source. I initially brushed it off as my imagination playing tricks on me, but then I heard it again, a subtle creak on the wooden floor, like the sound of a footstep. My heart began to race as I crapped a baseball bat from under my bed. My only form of protection, the house, was shrouded in darkness, and I hesitated to turn on the lights, fearing it would give away my position. I inched my way into the hallway, trying to be as quiet as possible. The dim glow of a nearby street light cast eerie shadows across the hallway. My mind was racing, trying to rationalize the situation. Maybe it was just a stray animal or a gust of wind, but deep down I knew it was something more sinister. As I moved toward the living room, the source of the sound, my heart sank. A figure stood there in the darkness, their silhouette barely visible. If you paralyzed me momentarily, and I struggled to find my voice. Who's there? I finally managed to stammer. No response. The figure just stood there, unmoving. I mustered all the courage I had left and flicked on the living room light. Why soft roasted blood in my veins, a man complete stranger was standing there, his eyes locked onto mine. He was dressed in like it, clothing, his face unchapped, and his eyes were hollow, devoid of any emotion. In his hand. He held a knife, its plate clanging ominously in the light. My heart was pounding so loudly that I thought he could hear Hennick set in, and I raised a baseball bat defensively. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. Instead, he took a step closer at the knife, clinging menacingly. In that moment, I knew I had to defend myself. I swung the bat with all the force I could muster, connected with his arm and blocking the knife from his hand. He let out a cry of pain, stumbling backward. I took that opportunity to flee, darting out the front door and into the safety of my neighbor's house. The police were called, and they arrived at my house in a matter of minutes. They searched the premises and apprehended the intruder who had taken refuge in my closet. Turns out he was a homeless man who had wandered into my home seeking shelter. He had no militia intent, but his presence had set me into a nightmarish order. To heal the encounter left me shaken and scarred. I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability and fear. Even the place I considered my sanctuary, I invested in a comprehensive security system and made sure all my doors and windows were fortified. Living alone in a small house on the outskirts of town, I relished in the solitude it provided. My evenings were quiet, spent reading or watching TV, and it had become a place where I felt safe and secure. Little did I know that one night that sense of security would be shattered. It was a dark and stormy night, rain pouring down relentlessly. The distant rumble of thunder added to the eerie atmosphere. As I curled up on a couch, engrossed in a mystery novel, the sudden sound of my door, roomy, set a jolt of surprise through me. Who on earth will be visiting on a night like this? Reluctantly, I got up to answer the door, peering through the people. A man, trenched from head to toe, stood on my doorstep. He held a tripping with Bible in one hand and wore a disheveled, soaked suit. His appearance sent a shiver down my spine, but I couldn't just leave him out there in the storm. I opened the door, tried to hide my unease. "Can I help you?" If a man smiled warmly, rainwater dripping from his hair. "I'm from the church," he said. "I was passing by when the storm hit, and I got caught in it. I was wondering if I could seek shelter here for a while and maybe talk to you about our congregation." I hesitated, not entirely comfortable with the idea of inviting a stranger into my home, but as mentioned, the church made me feel guilty for being distrustful. Besides, it was pouring rain, and he looked miserable. "All right," I said reluctantly. "You can come in." But just for a little while, he thanked me profusely. As he stepped inside, I gave him a towel to try off and offered a seat in the living room. He began talking about the church, its mission, and its community activities. I listened politely, those present still made me uneasy as the minutes passed. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off his eyes. All friendly seemed too intense, and I noticed he was constantly glancing around my house. His questions grew more personal, asking if I lived alone and what my daily routines were like. I began to feel trapped, a creeping sense of dread pelting within me. I wanted him out of my home, but I didn't want to be impolite. The storm outside continued to rage, and the minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity. Then, without warning, he abruptly stood up. "Thank you for your hospitality," he said with a forced smile. "I should be going now, relieved." I walked into the door, my heart pounding as he stepped back out into the rain. He turned to me and said, "You have a lovely home. I'll be back to visit soon." The words tend to chill down my spine. I quickly locked the door behind him, my mind racing. Who's that man, and why had he really come to my home on such a stormy night? The sense of unease lingered, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just narrowly avoided a nightmare that night. I double-checked all the locks, windows, and security systems in my house. I couldn't shake the fear that he might return, and I wanted to be prepared. Sleep eluded me, and I spent the night on edge, wondering what his true intentions had been. Chilling encounter had left me with a haunting sense of vulnerability, and it was a long time before I felt safe in my own home. Again, I had just returned from a week-long vacation with some friends, and the exhaustion was starting to set in. My small, cozy apartment had never looked so welcoming. I lugged my suitcase up the stairs, unlocked the door, and stepped inside, feeling a familiar sense of relief. The first thing I noticed was the eerie silence. It wasn't a comforting stillness I had expected, but something far more unsettling. The apartment was supposed to be empty. I lived alone, yet as I stood there in the doorway, the wave of dread washed over me. I could sense that something was horribly wrong. I cautiously moved through the dimly lit living room, my heart pounding in my chest. Television was on, casting flickering shadows across the walls. I never left it on when I was away, and I certainly didn't remember it being on when I left for vacation. As I crept further into the apartment, my ears caught a soft, almost imperceptible sound, a whisper of breath, something that should not have been there. Panic searched for me as I realized I was not alone. There was someone else here, lurking in the shadows of my own home, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I fumbled for the light switch and flicked it on. Sudden burst of light revealed a figure standing in the corner, partially hidden behind the curtains. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the intruder. It was a man, a complete stranger, standing there in my apartment. His eyes were wild, darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. He was wearing dirty, tattered clothes, and his unkempt appearances and shivers down my spine. "What the hell are you doing here?" I managed to stammer, my voice quivering with fear. The man didn't respond. His case locked onto me. He looked deranged, unstable, and I had no idea what he was capable of. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Had he broken? And while I was away, how did he enter my apartment? I reached for my phone in my pocket, my fingers trembling. I needed to call the police, but I didn't want to take my eyes off the intruder. I dialed 911 as discreetly as I could and whispered my situation to the operator. The man took a step closer, his gaze never leaving me. I could see the tension in his body, the unpredictability in his eyes. Fear and enwrapped boiled within me, and I packed away slowly, keeping the phone to my ear. Just then the operator's voice crackled for the phone. "The police are on their way. Stay on the line with me." I nodded, relief to ask someone on the other end of the line, but the intruder seemed to sense that Ty was running out. With a sudden burst of movement, he lunged toward me, a manic expression on his face. Sure terror propelled me into action. I sidestepped his attack, narrowly avoiding his grasp, and bowled for the door. As I burst out into the hallway, I heard the intruder shouting behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I raced down the stairs, heart pounding, until I was safely outside. Within minutes, the police arrived, and they quickly apprehended the intruder. It turned out he had broken in while I was away seeking shelter and food. He was homeless, desperate, and mentally unstable. It was a terrifying encounter, one that left me shaking into my core. Living alone had always been my preference. I cherished the solitude, the freedom to do as I please, without anyone else's interference. It was a quiet life, but it was my life, and I relished it. Little did I know that one ordinary evening that life would turn into a living nightmare. It was a chilly autumn night, and I had just returned home from a long day of work, the familiar routine of making dinner and settling in for some TV played out like countless evenings before. I had no reason to expect anything out of the ordinary. As I sat on my couch and crossed into crime trauma, I began to hear faint sounds like footsteps echoing in the hallway just outside my apartment. I paused the TV, straining to listen. Perhaps it was just a neighbor or the building settling. There were countless explanations for such noises, but then the footsteps grew louder, more Deliberate panic started to creep in as I realized that. Whoever was out there was heading toward my door. My heart pounded in my chest as I considered my options could be a neighbor who needed assistance or something far more sinister. Before I could decide, the doorknob began to turn slowly, almost cautiously. Michael's quickened, and I knew I had to act fast. I tipped it over to the door, my breath shallow, and peered through the people. What I saw sent Sage wasting me, a man I didn't recognize attempting to gain entry into my apartment. My mind raced. What should I do? I couldn't call the police without concrete evidence of a threat. It was just one man, and I didn't want to overreact. Maybe he was simply at the wrong door. As I hesitated, the man outside continued to fiddle with the log. It became painfully clear that he had no intention of leaving. Fear said me, but I knew I couldn't stay paralyzed by it. I had to confront him and find out what he wanted. I took a deep breath, mustered every ounce of courage, and swung open the door. The man startled by my sudden appearance took a step back. His disheveled appearance, while eyes and the odor of alcohol on his breath made it clear that he wasn't a lost neighbor. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my voice quaking, but determined, stammered, mumbling something incoherent. I repeated my question more forcefully this time, and he finally managed to pull it out. I thought this was my friend's place. His explanation sounded flimsy, and I wasn't buying. I had never seen this man before, and his erratic behavior sent alarms ringing in my head. I told him to leave immediately, but he just stood there, his eyes darting around my apartment. That's when I made a critical mistake. I turned to reach for my phone to call the police. In that split second, the intruder lunged at me, knocking me to the ground. Panic and adrenaline coursed through me. As I fought back, struggling to push him off, we crappled on the floor. Faroon spinning around us, I managed to land a punch, disorienting him for a moment. It was all I needed to scramble to my feet and make a run for it. I bolted out of my apartment and down the hallway, now looking back until I reached the safety of a neighbor's door. My neighbor, a pearly man with concerned look on his face, let me, and he called the police while I cast for an air relaying the terrifying ordeal I had just experienced. Within minutes, the authorities arrived and apprehended the intruder. It turned out that the man had a history of mental health issues and had been involved in prior incidents. I shudder to think about what might have happened had I not acted quickly. The encounter left me scared, not just physically, but emotionally too. My husband had gone to visit his brother, leaving me home alone. We've been married for 5 years, and while I cherished our time together, I also valued the rare moments of solitude. Little did I know that this particular evening would be etched into my memory as the most horrifying night of my life. I decided to spend the evening relaxing in the living room, catching up on some reading. The soft glow of the reading lab cast comforting shadows across the room, and the faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound that interrupted the stillness of the house. With a warm blanket draped over me, I settled into my book, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that had inexplicably settled over me. As the minutes ticked by, I found myself glancing at the clock more often than usual. It was getting late, and I couldn't help but worry about my husband's long absence. He hadn't called or texted to let me know when he'd be back, which was unlike in my imagination. Started to run wild with all the potential reasons for his delay. Just when I was on the verge of calling him to check, a noise from the backyard startled me. It was a faint rustling, almost imperceptible, but enough to make my heart race. I shook off my unease, attributing the sound of the wind or perhaps a stray animal, yet the sense of being watched lingered. I decided to get up and check the locks on the doors and windows. I have developed since moving to this neighborhood. As I moved through the house, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of dread. The windows were secure, the doors locked, but the unease remained gnawing at the edges of my consciousness. Returning to the living room, I picked up my book in an attempt to regain some semblance of normalcy. However, the feeling of being watched persisted, intensifying with each passing moment. It was as though an invisible presence lurked just beyond my line of sight. I tried to brush it off as an overactive imagination, but when I glanced at the sliding glass door that led to the backyard, I froze. There on the other side of the glass was a figure, a tall silhouette that seemed to be peering into my home. My heart leaped into my throat, and I cast in shocked panic, searched through me, and I fumbled for my phone to call the police. As I dialed 911, I watched in terror as the intruder, realizing I'd seen him, moved away from the door. The dispatcher assured me that help was on the way, but every second that passed felt like an eternity. Huddled in the corner of the room, clutching my phone and praying for police to arrive, I could hear faint sounds coming from outside. It was the intruder circling the house, trying to find a way. In the rational part of my brain told me to stay quiet and hidden, but the fear was overwhelming. Then the worst possible thing happened. The power went out. The room plunged into darkness, and I was left In absolute terror, I felt. Vulnerable and trapped, my heart pounding in my chest as I strained to hear any sign of the intruder's approach. Minutes passed like hours, and finally the distant wail of sirens pierced the silence. Relief washed over me as the police arrived, their flashing lights illuminating the darkness. They searched the property, and after what felt like an eternity, they emerged with a man in custody. It turned out that the intruder was a stranger who had been lurking in the neighborhood. My husband's prolonged absence had given him the opportunity to target our home. The police assured me that they would thoroughly investigate the incident, but I was too shaken to fully grasp their words. My husband returned home, alarmed by the police cars outside our house. I rushed into his arms, grateful that he was safe and that the nightmare was over, but the encounter with the intruder left scars that would never fully heal. I could no longer feel safe in my own home, and the shadows of that terrifying night continued to haunt my thoughts. That night, I learned the true meaning of fear, the heart-pounding, bone-chilling terror that lingers long after the danger has passed. It was a nightmare I wished I could forget, but one that will forever remind me of the vulnerability that comes with being home alone, waiting for a loved one to return. 444.